Hello everyone. If you are new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do it. Thanks. By the way, I also have a Luffy fan fiction channel. If you are interested, the link is in the description. The Fire Shadow of Young Justice. By this is not a fan fiction. Naruto, after an unexpected encounter with Madara Uchiha, is sent via space-time jutsu to another dimension, the DC universe. Learning to accept his new life in a new world, Naruto becomes Fire Shadow, the youngest member of the Justice League and head supervisor of the newly formed Young Justice team. I don't own anything. Adios.
Chapter 1. Entrance. A blonde, blue-eyed teenager looked down upon an unfamiliar setting. His home would appear to be primitive compared to what was down below the tall building. The entire surface seemed to be in constant movement. Strange metallic things seemed to be stopping in movement and sync with one another, stopping and going at incredible speeds that couldn't be matched by any carriages he had ever seen in his life, though it didn't hold a candle to the speed that he could move naturally. As the wind blew in his face, the figure scrunched his nose at the influx of smells that invaded his senses. This was another thing that cemented the fact he was nowhere near home. There were so many pollutants floating around in the air he was surprised that the humans down below hadn't keeled over due to a number of lung diseases. There was also the little fact that this city was lit up brighter than a flaming forest. Everywhere he looked there was some sort of artificial light brightening the darkened sky. He stared sadly up at the brightened sky where even the moon seemed dull against the brightness the city illuminated. Instead of the thousands of stars he had come to be accustomed to seeing during his nightly watches on either a mission or guard duty, were nowhere to be seen. It was as if they had been erased from the world altogether. Sighing, the figure spoke to his only companion that had come along, unwillingly, with him. Kurama. He thought to his companion, any idea where we are? No, Naruto, Kurama answered, his voice deep with a demonic twinge to it. I do not know where we are, but I do understand that this world is not the world we come from, but rather a different reality or dimension. Naruto sighed disappointingly, having hoped that Kurama of all people would be able to know where they had landed. First things first, he decided, I need to learn the language if we stand a chance getting back home, he said to his inner demon. The difference in language was among one of the first things Naruto had noticed when he woke up in the middle of an unknown alleyway directly below the building he stood upon. To him, it sounded similar to baby gibberish, despite noticing that there was some sort of structure and pattern with each sound. Kurama chose to speak up for the moment. Why should you go back? After everything you have done for them, everything you have sacrificed, they do nothing in return. All they have done is send you on more missions, ones designed for those who have been fighting for far longer, trying to send you to your death because of me. Naruto thought long about what he had said. It was true, with Tsunade out of commission, the elders of the village had taken control of the village, and with the 4th grade shinobi war going on in full swing, the village sought an end to their resident demon. He never understood why they loathed him after he had defeated Pain. Whilst the village itself had grudgingly forgiven him, or perhaps seen him for who he truly was rather than the demon he held, the shinobi population, particularly the older generation, did not. It is still my home, Kurama. Naruto finally said to his lifelong companion, I don't care for the council. We're half of the shinobi and civilian population. But there are enough people there that I love enough to do anything for. I have to go back, I cannot leave them to face that monster without me. Kurama shook his red furred hair within his cage, annoyed yet proud at his vessel for his undying loyalty. Even if it was to those that would never deserve such loyalty, since their encounter with Pain, Kurama had taken a more personal approach to training his jailer, refusing to have someone so weak and reliant on blatant love to survive as his vessel. After months of training and reluctantly getting to know one another on a more personal level, they could both grudgingly admit to being reluctant friends. Is there any way for me to learn their language without the use of shadow clones? Something more instant? I would rather not spend the few days, or perhaps weeks depending on how complex the language is, to learn it properly. With a slight sigh, Kurama spoke to his companion. Lock onto a capable-looking human down below and I will do the rest. Complying to Kurama's orders, Naruto locked onto a human who seemed rather important if his outfit was anything to go by. After a few moments, he felt a swell of chakra flow through his body, centering in on his mind. He stared on for a few seconds longer, beginning to doubt Kurama as nothing happened before he held his head with both hands in complete agony. "Ahhhhhhhrrrgg," he screamed loudly, not caring for his attempt to be unnoticed. His mind felt as though it were being shredded, stretched, and pierced at the same time. It was a few moments later that the pain subsided abruptly, his rugged breathing all that was heard in his pained ears. Sorry, the nine-tailed demon apologized. This was the quickest way for you to learn their language, which seems to be called English. The reason it's so painful is because of the sudden influx of knowledge, similar to that of your memory overload when you dispelled too many shadow clones at once. That was worse than one of Sakura's punches. Naruto commented softly, still trying to regain his composure. After a few moments, he He rose from the floor he had fallen to during some point of the unbearable agony. Breathing deeply, Naruto strode back to the edge of the building and looked down below, wondering how these people could continue moving so fast as though they had no time to accomplish what they set out to do. "At least you aren't unconscious," the demon quipped dryly. "True," Naruto conceded. "Now, we need to find some sort of lodging. And money. Clothes can easily be hanged since I doubt anbu attire is considered normal. You grew up practically on the streets, Naruto. I'm sure you're not that rusty in your pickpocketing skills." "I'm not." He sighed to himself before jumping down to the alleyway he had arrived in. "They'll probably not even notice I stole from them until they get home." Making a single hand seal, Naruto's attire changed to that of simple civilian pants and shirt with a black jacket, his hood covering the majority of his face. In order to look less unique, he had also chosen to hide his birthmarks that marred his cheeks. After a few moments of composing himself, Naruto joined the fray of people bustling in the city streets seamlessly. No one around him had given him a second glance, or even a first. He inwardly scoffed at how unprepared civilians were, how they never noticed anything around them other than what concerned them. It was why they so easily blamed those who took it upon themselves to protect them rather than shifting the blame on themselves for not ever bothering to learn to protect themselves when situations left them vulnerable. With a small smirk, Naruto walked up to several people, taking a few leather wallets and loose jewelry items. He didn't know how valuable they were, but everything was worth something, so taking them would provide him with something when he searched for a pawn shop. It was after walking a number of blocks that Naruto discovered a closed jewelry store. He felt rather bad for whoever owned the shop, but when it came down to it, this was for his survival and that was what he was trained to maintain. It was a quick and easy heist, if it could be called such. The security the jewelry shop held was hardly enough to stop even a genin. Sighing, Naruto took just the most expensive-looking items that Kurama pointed out. To him, they were worthless little pieces of earth, but people found such value in them. It was strange but useful in this moment nonetheless. After safely exiting the jewelry store without tipping off any of the abysmal security, Naruto was able to go to several pawn shops and sell his stolen goods. He knew better than to sell the items to stores nearby the jewelry shop and as such had spent half an hour to run at top speeds to another city altogether. There's little chance anyone would recognize him to be a thief. It was better to be safer rather than annoyed and frustrated later on. The pawn shop owners gave him curious looks to the items he was selling, but after a lifetime of being a deceiver, Naruto had learned to lie without any sort of tell. When his watch, one that he had stolen earlier in the night, had shown that it was rather late, he stored the wad of cash in his jacket and went in search of finding somewhere to sleep for the night. He would rather not go to a hotel or motel, knowing they required some sort of identification card, none of which he possessed since he was essentially a ghost in this world. After half an hour of searching, he had found an abandoned apartment building deep in the slums of a rather dark and intimidating city. It was practically in the heart of the wretched and corrupt. Everywhere he had looked when he found the building sent his paranoia on an ultimate high since he could recognize that everyone around him wanted nothing more than to see whether or not he would hurt them, or to see whether or not he would be a good person to mug. When he entered the rundown apartment that left him feeling rather nostalgic, Naruto seated himself in a meditative position. "We need to learn more about this world," Kurama said to Naruto. Nodding, Naruto ran through a series of hand seals before 24 shadow clones came into existence around him. "I need to know as much as possible about this world as quickly as possible. Disperse, remain hidden, and learn as much as you can. Dispel yourselves with a 2-minute interval between the last, but do not do so until you have learned as much as you can." "Right, boss," the clones said in unison before disappearing in another puff of smoke. Satisfied, Naruto made his way toward a slightly cleaner part of the abandoned apartment room, bringing out a scroll which he unsealed to produce a futon. It was always better to be prepared for unexpected events such as this, though he never once in his life thought it possible to somehow wind up in another dimension. Damn that Madara, he thought bitterly. Get some sleep, kid. You're undoubtedly going to need it. Waking up, Naruto found that all of his clones had dispersed, and thanks to them, now had a basic understanding of the dimension he was indefinitely trapped in. This world was definitely far different than his own, despite the slight similarities they shared, though he counted that more on simply the way both human societies evolved than coincidences. There were cities, countries, rulers, a form of government, laws, all things he had grown accustomed to. The only thing that was far different from his homeworld in this dimension was not only the lack of any and all chakra, including that from nature, was the existence of superheroes and supervillains. The majority of superheroes had taken it upon themselves to defend the Earth from any and all threats, and even formed their own group known as the Justice League. It was almost insane how much every major society in the world depended on these heroes even though they had their own form of defense system. There were numerous heroes and their abilities varied greatly, though the thing that had surprised him the most weren't their abilities, but rather the knowledge that there were actual aliens. Aliens. The very idea had initially scared him more than the possibility of the existence of ghosts. At least until he learned that both resident aliens were a part of the superhero category. The supervillains were truly something else. Having grown up in a world that practically bred trained killers, he had seen the worst of human nature in all of its forms, but many of these villains took the cake. Joker had stood out to him, simply because he caused chaos simply for the sake of chaos. There was no motive, no need for vengeance, merely chaos. A madman. There were many others that had taken it upon themselves to use their abilities to sat their sinful desires. Their greed and lust for power being the greatest motivation for them all. To say this world was strange to Naruto was the understatement of the century. Though each of these meta-humans' abilities were limited, none even came close to the amount of experience and skill he had. He had been through hell and back, seen more than his fair share of death and destruction. Nothing that had happened to this planet came particularly close to what he had lived through. What do you think our first move should be? It's clear that these Leaguers are the most powerful beings on this planet, and also probably the only ones who could help us get back. Going to them seems to be the best bet for now. However, I am hesitant to tell them everything of our predicament, particularly the existence of myself. Though they seem more intelligent than those of our world, together people are ridiculously idiotic. Though he wanted to protest, Naruto couldn't help but agree that the Justice League may very well count him a villain, simply for housing the most powerful tailed beast of his dimension. Either way, they're the best chance we have of getting home. It was 4 months later that Naruto realized how hard it was to be granted audience with the Justice League. He knew, and understood, how busy the League was, having to defend the entire planet, but this was particularly ridiculous. Everywhere he went to try to meet with even one Leaguer, he was too little too late, and had to constantly watch as whichever hero he managed to track down either fly, or run away from the scene without so much of a glance his way. Naruto, Kurama said to his jailer, "The League is not being much help. We've been trying to find them for 4 months. All we have managed to accomplish is creating a fake identity for yourself, nothing more. Yeah, I'm starting to think we're better off alone. There is the chance that we may not be able to return, Naruto." The demon said casually, "Whether we like it or not, there is a high possibility that we are stuck here. With no chakra, and no knowledge of the way Madara sent us here, there is little we can do." With a grunt of denial, Naruto began paving his own way in this new world. Sporting his anbu gear and fox mask, he began to do his own hero work. Saving people from burning buildings, stopping heists, hindering plans for world domination, the works. At first, it was to do something since he had reached the peak of his boredom level, but once he saw the faces of the more than grateful civilians he saved, he realized how much he had missed it. Though here, there were none who knew of the demon inside him, nor any who felt any disgust or hate toward him. Excluding those who he threw into prison cells, only respect and appreciation. Whenever asked for his name, Naruto gave them Fire Shadow, the English translation to Hokage. It wasn't exactly the way he had hoped to gain the title, but it worked nonetheless. Surprisingly or not, doing this was pretty much the only way to get the good attention from the League. After a few months of his own vigilante-style heroism, he was greeted by the Man of Steel himself, aka Superman. To say he was surprised would have been an understatement. After all, he had been trying to get a minute with the man for well over a month not so long ago, as well as the rest of the League to no avail, and now, here he was on his own accord. "Fire Shadow, I presume?" he said, floating in front of him as Naruto himself had chakra glued himself to the side of a skyscraper. "Yes?" he asked in a bored tone. Inside he was feeling rather conflicted. On the one side, he was meeting Superman. This guy could pack a serious punch, and on the other, it was Superman, who had seemingly been doing everything possible to avoid the young blonde shinobi. Definitely enough to irk him into wanting to punch the man. "I, and the rest of the League, have recognized your skill and morals and would be honored to have you join our ranks as an official member of the Justice League." For the moment, Naru thought a mask, which was lined with lead paint, thus making the Man of Steel unable to see his actual face, since his eyes widened considerably and his jaw went a bit slack. It was hard to believe. Really, they were offering him a spot on the Justice League. To join or not to join? Shut up and join, kid. You can bring those arrogant teams down a peg or two. I humbly accept. Fire Shadow finally said to Superman, who smiled in return. Then, if you could be at the Hall of Justice tomorrow by 12 p.m., we can officially indict you into the League. I shall be there, he said simply before watching the Man of Steel fly off, probably going to save a cat from a tree. Cat. Damn, now I have those stupid memories of all those times I had to catch that damned cat Tama. Don't remind me, kid. I wanted to skin that bloody animal, said the Kyuubi, his voice full of hatred for that little pest. Well, now I'm a part of the League. They better not treat me like some kid, Naruto said with a small humph. Kid, I don't even think they know how old you really are. You're probably one, if not the, most powerful being in this pitiful place, thanks to yours truly, so I doubt they would think you're a 17-year-old brat. Plus, your voice is muffled by the mask, so you don't even really sound 17. Who are you calling a brat, furball? And, yeah, you're probably right. I'll let them know when I'm absolutely positive they won't treat me like everyone did back home, like I was weak. Face it, kid. You were weak. Shut up, furball. Naruto said, though knowing full well how true that statement was. Even with the Kyuubi's chakra, he was weak. He couldn't even bring Sasuke back. He nearly died defeating Pain. Hell, every major mission he nearly died. Not in one major battle was he left the standing victor. No, he was the victor, always lying in a damned hospital bed for days if not weeks. Well, nothing to do until tomorrow. He thought returning to his home. The ceremony of his becoming an official member of the Justice League was met with a lot of media, much to Naruto's annoyance. They asked every possible question, until he firmly said that he would answer nothing about who he was, where he came from, and just what the extent of his abilities were. To most, he seemed rather rude. To others, he was a mystery that was just waiting to be solved. Namely to people like Lois Lane. The other Leaguers seemed interested in the new blood, and were eager to see him in action for their very own eyes rather than just hearing about what he could do. Batman, along with a few others, Zatara among them, were weary and suspicious of this man. They knew virtually nothing about him, not even his actual name, nor what he looked like underneath his mask as he refused to take it off. All they knew was that he was a powerful 5 feet 11 inches blonde whose abilities caused them to question whether or not he was actually human. Jun Jones had tried to peer into his thoughts in order to find out more about him, but was forcefully kicked out thanks to his extra host. Of course, this only made them all the more cautious of their newest member. When asked if he would take his mask off, he simply said that once Batman took his off, he would as well. As if that were ever to happen, and everyone knew it. The Kyuubi was actually surprised, and a bit impressed, at how well he kept his identity a secret. Not once had he acted like the happy-go-lucky Gaki he was used to. Instead, he seemed to actually be more mature. He hadn't even pranked anyone since he arrived. But, then it hit him. The only reason his vessel had suddenly become more serious is because people here actually acknowledged him, unlike those fools in Konohagakure. If they could only see him now. Regardless, he was pleased with the change in demeanor of his vessel. The, I'm going to be the Hokage one day, believe it, brat that he once used to be was long gone, and for the better. 2 years had passed and it became evident to the young Konoha shinobi that the chances of going home were dwindling down into single-digit percentiles. Whatever time, space jutsu Madara had managed to inflict upon him was something beyond his abilities, and since there were no chakra-wielding people in this world, learning the skills needed to imitate his technique was impossible. That, and he didn't particularly want to go raving around he was from another dimension, especially after he learned that there were, theoretically, billions of dimensions. So finding his would be harder than finding a needle in a 10-foot-high haystack. Besides, by now, he would have been deemed killed in action and the village would have moved on by now, the more close-minded civilians probably celebrating his death regardless of his saving them against pain. Still, it wasn't so bad. He had become one of the strongest members of the Justice League thanks to his mastery in Tai, Nin, and Fuinjutsu, of which he still refused to let anyone understand how it worked. The one who was more persistent in his trying to figure Naruto out was none other than the Dark Knight himself. Batman had been able to figure everyone else out, but Fire Shadow had remained an enigma. Despite his attempts of finding more about the guy, Batman remained in the dark for just about everything pertaining to him. He didn't even have a clue as to what the man liked to eat. For all his detective skills, he couldn't even figure that out, let alone just how his powers worked. He knew they manifested themselves just after he completes a series of hand signs, all of which he documented, but as to where his powers originate from or the energy used to manifest them, remained a complete mystery he was more than determined to figure out. As it was, the Caped Crusader had little trust for the newest member of the League, despite his proving loyal during the various battles he had accompanied him on. Everyone was entitled to their own little secrets after all, so what if he had a few more than the average? After a year of being a member of the League, Naruto had confessed his true age, baffling the League. They had allowed a minor to join their ranks. A kid at 17 had become a member of the Justice League and had been recognized as one of its strongest members. While the Justice League members were conflicted in their feelings about the sudden confession, their sidekicks were overjoyed to hear that such a young hero had managed to become the youngest member of the Justice League, save for Captain Marvel who was at the time only 9, not that anyone other than Batman knew. Thankfully, they treated him only slightly different, sometimes reverting back to rather protective mentors during battles. Though after a while they all finally realized that he was stronger than most of them and could easily hold his own against an enemy, so they backed off. The Kyuubi had, on several occasions, made an appearance, though, luckily, it was only to his enemies rather than any of the League. He did not want to have to deal with explaining that he had a demon sealed inside him. He knew from hands-on experience that people are fearful and act out on impulse when they are met with something unknown and possibly threatening. Here, he was given a chance to escape the scorn and hatred, so there was no reason to bring it up. Though he trusted the League with his life, and returned that trust on the battlefield, Naruto, wisely or not, did not trust any of them with his identity or past. This, of course, hurt and angered some of the league. But they couldn't say much as they all had their own personal lives they kept hidden from the public and their peers. Though this didn't mean he hadn't befriended some of them. He had taken to the Flash, Green Arrow, Aquaman, and to some extent, Superman. There were times when he reverted back to his happy-go-lucky self, particularly when ramen became a part of a conversation. He also had that uncanny ability to see the good in everyone, and was able to sympathize with a great deal of them. He did after all were hungry, world before all this. Some were surprised at how wise the young man could be when it came to the harsh truths of life. They couldn't understand how this young man could know so much of pain and loss, and unless he changed his mind, they never would. Even so, none confronted him about it, save for Batman, who tried on several occasions to get some sort of information out of him while asking misleading questions. He thanked his anbu training whenever Batman came to him. If he hadn't had it, then he would have most certainly told the man everything he needed to know to figure out just what he was, and possibly where he was from. As such, he was always weary of the Caved Crusader. So when he messaged him to speak privately, Naruto naturally kept alert. Batman had asked the Fire Shadow to come meet him at the Hall of Justice only a few minutes earlier, stating it was of importance and he should be quick to arrive. Which wasn't all too difficult given he was only a few miles away from the hall, and that he had placed the seal which activated his father's Hirishin technique. It took less than 2 minutes to arrive in a red flash. Walking inside, Naruto made his way to the meeting chamber, where the Zeta Tube was located, and looked to find the black caved man on the computer monitor. Fire Shadow. Batman greeted curtly. Batman. Naruto said in a rather bored voice, what was it you needed to speak to me about? I'm sure you've heard of the new team being put together, he asked rhetorically. Of course Naruto had heard of the new, shadow, team of the Justice League, Young Justice. After the abrupt fallout of Green Arrow's apprentice, Speedy, the other sidekicks of the main leaguers had banded together and demanded to be their own team after their mission at Cadmus Labs, as well as the discovery of Superman's clone. Of course, he said simply, I'm offering you the position of being their head supervisor, Batman said, getting straight to the point. Had Naruto not been wearing a mask, his obvious shock would have been clearly written on his face. Batman. The Batman was offering him the opportunity to be the mentor to the younger generation of heroes. His own apprentice among them. It was so outrageous it was practically laughable. You're serious? He stated more than asked. All Naruto got was a long stare, as if waiting for an answer. He thought about it for a few long moments, head supervisor. That was essentially the same as a Junin sensei was to a new squad of genin, as Kakashi was to Sakura, Sasuke, and he when he was younger. Maybe this was something he could do to make a real difference. No doubt these young heroes were going through some sort of turmoil. They did after all just denounce their apprenticeship, partnership with their mentors, though he was sure they were keeping close contact with them. After everything they had gone through together, thinking they would cut them completely out of their lives was preposterous. Regardless, he could make a difference. Alright, he began, so long as everyone remembers that this is going to be my team, meaning I don't want anyone to interfere with how I deal with their training, ECT, I accept. Batman, ever the stoic man, showed no emotion to his condition and simply said, HN, you should know that you will not be the only one to help train them. He said, though you may be capable, there are members that require more personalized training exercises. That's fine. 2 teachers are better than 1 after all. Naruto said, but my voices should be the highest authority. Very well, Batman said with slight hesitation. Nodding, Naruto followed suit as Batman walked over to the Zeta Tube, the mechanic voice stating their name and league membership number before sending them to their destination, Mount Justice. This is going to be interesting. Naruto thought just as Batman and he emerged from the blinding Zeta Tube light, Mount Justice. What do you mean, head supervisor? Kid Flash demanded from Red Tornado, frustration and annoyance evident in the young speedster's voice. As I said, replied said leaguer, the Justice League has appointed a head supervisor who will overlook the majority of your training as well as the administering of missions. While Black Canary and myself shall remain in our roles as trainer and supervisor, he shall have the utmost authority when it comes to the dealings of this team. So it's just a glorified babysitter, Superboy said, scowling that the Justice League had done so. This isn't so different from what you've been doing, right, Red Tornado? Megan asked. Indeed. He will also accompany the team on missions to mark your progress, replied said leaguer. You keep saying, he, but who is it? Robin asked, a bit annoyed that they wouldn't be working independently from the league as he had hoped they would be. You shall meet him, recognized. Batman 02. Fire Shadow 17. Came a synthesized voice that echoed throughout the hall, interrupting Red Tornado. Now, he finished. Before the 2 figures had fully come through the Zeta Tube, Kid Flashes became wide-eyed. No way. We got the Fire Shadow? Robin exclaimed, equally surprised. This is most surprising, said the young Atlantean as he secured his gaze at the oncoming fox-masked figure, not particularly caring for the Dark Knight that walked beside him. I'm sorry, but who is Fire Shadow? Megan asked, a bit confused as to why this person was so interesting to her teammates. Robin, being the ever-informed teen that he was, chose to answer her with clear enthusiasm. Fire Shadow, currently the youngest member of the Justice League. Joined 2 years ago when he was 17, and is easily one of the strongest members of the league. Nobody really knows anything about him, not even Batman. He added a bit after, a small smirk finding its way onto the boy's face. No one really knows where he came from, or if he's even human despite his appearance. His abilities range from cloning physical bodies of himself, to the manipulation of the elements, though even now the full extent of his powers are unclear. Robin stated. To the young teenager, said Leaguer was his idol. Being so young, without training under any Leaguer, or any superhero, and being able to become a member of the Justice League, how could a 13-year-old hero not idolize the guy? He doesn't look so tough, Superboy said, not believing that this masked man could possibly be as strong as Robin made him out to be. He was Superman's clone. A living weapon. He was as strong as they came, and nothing could be stronger than he was, least of all this guy. Really, I thought the mask would help some with that. Naruto said, a bit amused at the boy's comment. Had it been in another time, he would have reacted differently. In his genin days, he would have yelled in protest, ending with, believe it, and someone, Sasuke calling him Adobe. The group of young heroes had the decency to look a bit sheepish when they were caught talking about him, save for Superboy who looked as though he couldn't care less. Taking a few more steps, Naruto and Batman were standing in front of the teens with a fair gap between them. Team, this is Fire Shadow, your head supervisor. Batman said in his usual toneless voice, I'm sure you know of his role. Yes. Red Tornado answered for them, I explained it shortly before you arrived. Introductions are in order then, he continued, only to be stopped by Robin taking up the initiative. I'm Robin, he said pointing to himself with his thumb. This is Aqualad, Kid Flash, Superboy, and Miss M. He continued pointing to the said heroes in order of introduction. Naruto, in fact, already knew 3 of the heroes since he was more or less acquainted with their mentors. He hadn't, however, gotten the chance to know Superboy or Miss M, mainly because 1. Superman had absolutely no idea what to do with his clone, let alone introduce him to the other Leaguers, and 2. Martian Manhunter hardly wanted to associate with him after the whole mind-reading fiasco. So when his so-called niece arrived to Earth, he wasn't exactly invited to the little welcoming party. I'm surprised that freak of a bat is actually letting you teach his protege. The Kyuubi said offhandedly as he watched the little introduction from his cell. You and me both, Kurama. But, no way in hell am I going to do something that'll arouse his suspicion of me. I don't need him on my case again. Guess not, it took us months to get that persistence bat to back off. Kurama spat out. It was annoying that the stupid bat couldn't just let something go. The moment Naruto had aroused the Justice League's attention, the Dark Knight had been trying nearly everything to get information on him. All except for the one thing that might have gotten him answers, asking. But after the 3rd time the said Leaguer had trailed them, Naruto decided he would make sure the Dark Knight couldn't find anything of importance about him, mainly for the fun of it rather than just spite. Well, if anything he's using his little sidekick to gain some sort of intel on me. I wouldn't be surprised if he was. Kurama paused before continuing, actually, I'm pretty sure he is, kid. Yeah, he's definitely using his little sidekick for that, even if the boy doesn't know it. Nice to meet you all, Naruto said a bit after the introductions. I have prior business to attend to. Fire Shadow, they are now in your care, Batman said. Though his voice didn't give way to much emotion, Naruto, being the trained shinobi that he was, caught onto the slight discontent when he said, your care. Until next time, Batman. Fire Shadow said as the Dark Knight was engulfed in the Zeta Tube's light. Turning back to his new charges, Naruto couldn't help but smile. He had never had a team he was in charge of before. Sure, there was Konohamaru Corps. But that was more of a hobby and unofficial sort of position. Well, he started. No point in wasting time when we could be doing something productive. So let's start with getting to know a little more about each other, nay? Each of the team looked a bit surprised at his sudden change in demeanor. When he was talking to Batman, it seemed as though Fire Shadow couldn't care less about the newly formed team. But as soon as the said Leaguer was gone, the tension was as well, and with it, replaced with a sudden light feeling, it almost relaxing. But before that, let's get a change of scenery. All this metal is suffocating, he said with a small shrug before walking to Red Tornado. Could you point us, or lead us to the training center? He asked politely. Oh, I could lead us, Fire Shadow, Miss M said a bit excitedly before Red Tornado could answer. Ah, even better, he said, a smile forming behind his mask. Lead the way, Miss M. Without saying much else, Naruto followed an excited young Martian who floated towards the training center's entrance. Once there, Red Tornado advised Naruto to choose the layout of the training room through the use of the large console to the left of the entrance. In that moment, Naruto had yet again been thankful for his mask as he was wholeheartedly surprised. He knew of training halls which literally took on the form of whatever the user wanted to be in, whether it be a sandy desert or in the middle of a city, but he hadn't known that Mount Justice was equipped with such a training facility. Thanking the leaguer, Naruto walked over to the console and was able to quickly configure the training center in the form he wished, Training Ground 7. With a small smile, Naruto opened the doors and revealed to the rest of his team what he had grown up in. He was partially amazed at how easy it was for the computer to create the layout, but was nonetheless happy. Walking toward open area, Naruto turned to face his team, who all wore the same expressions of confusion. "Why are we out here?" was the collective thought of each of the young hero. He hadn't known what to expect with Fire Shadow as their new head supervisor. Robin, Aqualad, and Kid Flash had all heard stories of the young leaguer. Each time their mentor had reiterated a mission and Fire Shadow's part left them in a state of awe and wonder. Whereas Superboy and Miss M were in the dark as to what he was truly capable of. "Much better," Naruto said with an amused tone, though there was a hint of pain in it. If there was one thing that had bothered him about this world, it would be the air quality. Rather than the crisp clean air he was used to, the air was murky and, for lack of a better word, disgusting. He understood that the machines they used had polluted the air, but he suspected he would never truly get used to it. "Man, I miss Konoha," Naruto thought a bit sadly as he looked at his surrounding area. "Kit, why do you even want to go back? For all we know, that world no longer exists. Madara made sure to get rid of you before he enacted his plans. Don't you remember what he said?" "How can I forget?" Naruto thought with bitter anger seeping through his very pores before he reined it back in, hoping not to alarm his new charges. However, one small 13-year-old hero caught onto the anger, however short and subtle it had been. What was that about? Robin wondered to himself before his thoughts were interrupted by Fire Shadow's muffled voice. "Well, now that we're here, let's get to know each other better," Naruto said as he plopped himself cross-leggedly onto the grass, motioning the rest to do the same. "Let's introduce ourselves, be it your real name or your code name, along with your likes and dislikes, and your abilities." "Could you go first, Fire Shadow?" Miss M asked tentatively. "Sure," he said before rising. "My code name is Fire Shadow, but you can call me Shadow for short. I like ramen and a number of other things. I dislike arrogant people, those who turn back on their teammates, and the 3 minutes it takes to heat ramen. As for my abilities, you'll see them eventually," he concluded before retaking his seat on the grass. Well, some things we learned, other than his obvious like for ramen, is that he dislikes arrogance and traitors. Robin thought to himself as he looked at his supervisor with a curious stare. "You're up," Naruto said pointing to Robin. "Name's Robin. I like training and acrobatics and dislike being treated like a kid. I've trained in several forms of martial arts and am an expert hacker," he said with a small smirk playing on the edges of his lips. Making sure to submit that to memory, Naruto then pointed to Calder. "My name is Calder. Feel free to call me Calder, that is what my friends call me. I like to fight for justice and protect people precious to me as well as innocents who are unable to protect themselves. I dislike those who aim to harm others. My main ability is to use my water bearers to manipulate water to form different weapons. Protect his precious people." Naruto mused to himself. He had a distinct feeling that Haku would have enjoyed his company, and that he would work well with the young Atlantean. Letting his head tilt slightly, Naruto then motioned for Kid Flash to introduce himself. Getting the message, the teenager stood up and began, "I'm Wally West, aka Kid Flash. I like cute girls and being fast. I dislike doing anything slow and my power is being faster than everybody else." Naruto nearly laughed when Kid Flash sent a smile and glanced toward the young Martian when he openly stated he liked cute girls. With a small pause, he then pointed to Superboy. "Superboy," the clone stated, "I like to fight. I dislike wasting my time and I hate monkeys. I have the same powers as Superman." Wasn't really expecting the hate for monkeys, Naruto thought with a small smile before getting serious again. "However, from what I've learned about his abilities, I beg to differ, but we'll see," he thought to himself. Reason being is because he had heard that Superboy's Kryptonian abilities were either underdeveloped and hadn't fully come through, or were nearly non-existent. He hoped for the former seeing as how the young clone seemed to idolize his, for lack of a better word, father. Making a mental note to keep a record of Superboy's progress on his Kryptonian abilities, Naruto finally pointed to Miss M. "My name is Megan Moors, but you can call me Megan or Miss M. I like baking and I dislike people who discriminate against others." However much she tried to hide it, Naruto could hear a twinge of hardness in her voice when she said her dislike. It was a familiar tone and he could immediately tell that she was speaking from experience. Wondering why a green Martian would feel so adamant about discrimination, Naruto made another mental note to find out more about it, but turned his attention back to listening when she continued, "I have the ability to shapeshift, telepathy, and telekinesis." "Alright, that's all of us," the masked leaguer stated before standing. "Now, why don't we start with a little exercise?" he said with an amused tone before pulling out 4 silver bells. "The exercise is simple. Each of you have to get one of these bells from me." The 5 heroes looked at the masked man before them with different expressions, though Megan was the first to find her voice. "But, Shadow," she began, "there are 5 of us and only 4 bells." "Exactly," he said, "the one person who fails to get one of these bells will not become a part of the team." "What?" Robin exclaimed in outrage, and getting shocked faces from the rest as they too were caught off guard by their head supervisor's words. "You can't do that," Kid Flash screamed in protest. "Head supervisor, I can do anything I want with this team," Naruto said with a deadly tone, whether you or the league like it or not. He couldn't help but feel laughter growing in the back of his throat. The young heroes reacted just as he and his team had all those years ago, but that didn't necessarily mean there was no hope. "You have exactly 2 hours, he said before he pulled out a small timer from his pocket, "starting now," he said, taking one last look at them before he brought his hands into a familiar seal and disappeared in a puff of smoke. "Piece of cake," Kid Flash muttered just as he put on his goggles and took off at full speed into the tree-infested area. "Shows how strong he is, he just ran away," Superboy said as he too took off on his own. "Wait," Calder protested as he turned to his remaining teammates, "I do not believe." When a small childlike crackle of laughter reached his ears, Calder realized that only Miss M and he remained. Looking to her, he said, "Perhaps we could work together?" "Hello, Megan," Miss M said in a happy voice, her palm hitting her forehead, "we stand a better chance together." Both nodding to each other, they said of together. Hidden in the shadows of the branches above them, Naruto thought, "Also they have what it takes to pass, but the rest need to pick up on it too. Well, let's go see the solo acts first, shall we?" "Yes, let's, Kit," Kurama said with an evil-looking grin plastered on his face. Training Simulator, Mount Justice. 1 hour, 55 minutes and counting. Naruto laughed to himself a little as he silently walked through the simulated training room that took the form of Konoha's forest. Just a little less than 2 hours to teach these teen heroes what teamwork actually means. Inwardly, he was grinning like an idiot. Ever since Kakashi had used this test on his genin team and Naruto had been dying to use it on his own, and now he finally was. Though this team wasn't exactly like a genin team, it was pretty close. Besides, though he didn't have full control over their training as Black Canary was still going to teach them some valuable techniques, he did have the end say in what the team did. As he walked, Naruto heard the soft pitter-patter of running legs hitting the forest floor edging closer and closer to him. Someone had spotted him. It didn't take much to know that the person who approached him was none other than Kid Flash. He didn't exactly scream, subtlety, after all. In one swift movement, Naruto sidestepped to his left and dodged the scarcely controlled fist that threatened to slam into the back of his head. Looking onto Kid Flash, he realized the young teen didn't have full control of his speed as he just scarcely missed slammed into one of the many trees. That was one thing Naruto committed to memory about the young speedster. There would be many instances in his time as a hero where the need to stop abruptly, even going at top speed, is required. Even if it's not an immediate halt, the ability to change direction on a moment's notice was a countermeasure to that. Also something the boy seemed to lack. "Alright, no more messing around," Kid Flash stated with a grin, "one of those bells are mine." After exclaiming that, Wally started at him again, this time actually getting a bit creative and circling Naruto, hoping to catch him off guard by his inability to see where the speedster actually was on account of his after images. But, Naruto had plenty of experience at keeping a trained eye on his target, regardless of their speed. After all his time with Guy, Lee, and the Flash, he was able to keep notice of where Kid Flash was. It didn't take long for the young hero to attack his back, hoping to grasp hold of one of the silver bells tied tightly on his belt. While Naruto's speed wasn't nearly as fast as the Flash's, it certainly outmatched Wally's. Though if he trained the speedster the way Guy had trained Lee, Naruto was sure that the boy would one day outrun the Flash. Twisting his body, Naruto dodged the speedster's grasp and exclaimed in a mocking tone, "Olé," making the young hero scowl in annoyance. "Quit moving around," Wally exclaimed before again taking off at him head-on. With a small sigh, Naruto mentally noted that he also needed to teach the young hero a diversity of attacks. All he was doing was using his speed to try to outmatch his opponent. Which, on most cases, would work. However, he would occasionally meet some villain who would be able to match his speed, or counteract it with one of their own abilities. Someone like Count Vertigo would be able to stop the speedster before he got within 5 feet from him. With a mischievous grin plastered on his face, Naruto brought his hands to form a few seals as the speedster made his way toward him and called out, "SXY no jutsu." Wally was, to say the least, taken completely by surprise. As the plume of smoke dissipated, so did his head supervisor, leaving a very, very attractive blonde girl in his place, not to mention she was naked. Unable to stop himself in the full-on nosebleed that ensued from seeing such a sight, Naruto shifted back to his normal self, moved to grab the young speedster's outreached hand and was able to twist it in order to throw the boy aside in one quick movement. Kid Flash, who was still recovering from the amazing sight, was easily thrown to the ground and knocked unconscious. "I knew he would fall for that," Naruto thought, laughing out loud at the unconscious nose-bleeding speedster. Of course he would, Kurama said, stifling a roar of laughter. That was one jutsu that he let the kid get away with simply because of the hilarious effects it had on males. Still, he has a lot of potential. Indeed, Kurama said, collecting himself, though he is still too arrogant. Not as much as Sasuke or Neji were at one point, but still too overconfident in his abilities, Kurama said observantly. True, but knocking him down a few pegs would do wonders for him. I'm sure Black Canary already has something set up for him and the rest of the team knowing her. Out of all the leaguers, I have to say she's one of the better ones. She's just as good as those two fires of youth idiots when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. Not as fast, but damn good. Should I let you out so you could ask her out on a date, Kurama? Naruto said mockingly to the fox as he continued his assault on the teen. Shut up, kid. Kurama said with a rather angry growl. I can appreciate skill, but there is no way I would ever lower myself to these measly humans. Whatever you say, fox. Cutting off the fun conversation with the Kyuubi, Naruto finished the young speedster off with one final fist to his abdomen, sending Wally to hit one of the many trees surrounding them. Not bad, Wally. Naruto said to the boy who was currently fighting the battle to stay conscious. You have a lot of potential, but have yet to use it. You lack the motivation to continue to grow because of your arrogance. Once Naruto knew the boy was out for the count, he said with a smile, which Canary and I are going to have a lot of fun helping you with. Leaving the boy where he passed out, Naruto stood his ground for a short while, trying to feel where he felt a small ripple in the earth originate from. Only one thing could do that, and that was Superboy. Whether from venting his frustration on the poor unassuming earth or leaping an incredible distance in hopes of finding him, Naruto was unsure. Either way, the boy had given away his position, something that could very well cost his own life, and or the lives of his comrades in a real life and death situation. Least I didn't have to waste time trying to find him or Robin. Without bothering to hear the Kyuubi's snark comment, Naruto took off in the general direction of the ripple, and eventually found himself in a small circle of fallen trees. The area practically screamed, Superboy was here. No more hiding, yelled a rather aggravated young voice. Turning casually, Naruto met the gaze of the young clone who, like Wally, sped straight for him without thinking first. One thing Naruto noticed was his lack of speed. This was supposed to be Superman's clone. So where was the super speed? Wanting to gauge the clone's strength, Naruto let the fist make contact with his raised forearm. It hurt like hell. Not as much as Superman's punches, that much was for certain, but this kid seriously packed a punch. Easily on par with one of Sakura's chakra-enhanced punches. Letting Kurama's chakra handle healing the nearly broken bone and ripped muscles, Naruto kicked the clone in the abdomen, sending Superboy back a few yards. Naruto needed to see everything the boy could do. Only then could he hope to know what he had to train him in to make him stronger. Besides the obvious need of teamwork, of course. With an angry grunt, Superboy rushed forward again, and, not wanting to beat around the bush, Naruto started a strictly hand-to-hand battle with the young clone. He was faster than most, but his execution of attacks were sloppy. Whatever those genomorphs had taught him, they had failed to give him a proper foundation for his attacks. As such, his movements were on par with lower-level villains. Not a good thing when the League mainly dealt with the likes of the League of Shadows. After a short while, Superboy let out a rather agitated growl and then screamed, "Stop holding back." Naruto was rather surprised the boy noticed, but at the same time, grinned mischievously. The boy wanted a real fig. "Who let me out, kid?" Kurama said excitedly. Though he knew that the clone was nowhere near as powerful as Superman, he still had Kryptonian blood running through his veins, so he was obviously tougher than most and could survive his attacks. "Not a chance, Kurama. I just want to teach him a little lesson, not send him to the medbay. I'll just see how he handles me when I enhance my strength and speed with chakra." With an annoyed Kurama growling in the back of his head, Naruto focused his chakra into his legs and arms. "You're Superman's clone?" Fire Shadow asked in a slightly mocking tone. "HMPH. Let's see just how strong you are." Angered, Superboy began his assault again. Only this time, he had nearly no control over his attacks, thus making them far easier to dodge and manipulate their movements. Way too easily angered. I'll probably have to deal with that some way or another, Naruto thought with a small internal sigh. He also seems to show lack of other Kryptonian abilities. No attempt at flight, arctic breath, or even heat vision. I'll have to do some digging and see if that's normal for his apparent age. Finding that he had noted enough about the clone and his abilities, Naruto stepped back a bit and brought his hands to a similar hand seal until a plume of smoke revealed 4 exact copies of himself. Then, Naruto and his clones took off towards Superboy, who had shaken off his surprise and gotten into a defensive position, and screamed. Fire Shadow Rendon. Quicker than Superboy could keep up with, Shadow and his clones began to punch and kick his body with fluid motions. Though Superboy was doing a rather good job at blocking most of the punches, the last kick to the head caught him completely by surprise and sent him flying backwards onto the forest floor, the edges of his vision beginning to cloud. Looking to his side, Superboy saw his new head supervisor peer down at him. "You are strong, Superboy, that much I can admit," Shadow said, "but you are too quick to anger, and that is your greatest weakness. Rather than harnessing that rage, you let it control you. As of right now, you aren't even close to Superman's shadow." With that sentence, Naruto could see both hurt and anger cross the clone's face. However, with proper training, I have little doubt you will one day surpass your father. Even though Shadow had a mask on, covering his entire face, Superboy couldn't help but feel as though the leaguer had a smile on his face. Before he could do or say anything, Superboy succumbed to unconsciousness. 2 down and 3 to go, Naruto thought with a small smile. "One last solo act, Kid," Kurama said, "and it just so happens to be the baby bat." "That it is. Kid's smart though, kind of like Shikamaru, but with way more motivation. He's small though, so he's harder to catch, not when he's outnumbered by 1,000, Kid." "Hey, not a bad idea, Fox," Naruto thought with a wide mischievous grin. Now, off to find the baby bat. He finished before trying to find the specific power signature the 13-year-old hero let out. It didn't take long to find the right signature, and without missing a beat, Naruto went off toward the young hero's location. "It should not take this long to hack into the training simulator," Robin said in a frustrated voice as he fumbled with the small computer programmed into the armored glove on his left arm. "Sometimes, technology won't be there to help you, in escape or fighting, so what will you do when you're in those situations?" asked out a muffled voice Robin knew well enough to recognize. "Find an alternative way of escape or fighting style, duh," Robin replied cheekily, taking out a number of his own personalized batarangs in preparation. "Even when you're overrun," replied Shadow before calling out, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," making 200 physical copies of himself. He wanted to see if the young hero would realize that when you're outnumbered, your best bet of not being killed or captured is having people fighting beside you. Immediately, Robin sent out a dozen of his batarangs, and while his clones dodged the projectiles with mastery, the explosion triggered after a few seconds easily dispersed a small number of them. While fighting, he inwardly cursed his luck. How on earth was he supposed to grab hold of the bell when he didn't know which fire shadow was the real one? He had tried to keep an eye on the original, but when a dozen clones literally jumped him, his sight of the original was lost for good. While Robin fought off the miniature army of fire shadows, the original Naruto sunk into the earth, finding his way directly beneath the young teenager. He hated, absolutely loathed the time Kakashi had used this jutsu on him, and knew from experience how difficult it was to escape without insane strength or help. Above the surface, his clones were giving the young hero the fight of his life. Robin couldn't help but feel if his new head supervisor was slightly sadistic. Nearly 150 clones were attacking him with speed that was simply inhuman, not to mention their strength. While nothing was clearly broken, he wouldn't be surprised if he was going to be a new mix of purple, black, and blue the next morning. Still, he would show his new supervisor that he wasn't to be messed with. Sure, he was small, but he had more experience than any of the other guys on his team. He's been fighting crime since he was 9 years old. In order to fend off the mass amount of clones that surrounded him, Robin moved around as much as he could, trying his best not to waste a single movement. He had tried to use the trees to escape into a more advantageous position only to find that there were clones literally sticking to the side of the tree trunks defying the law of physics, and had thrust him back into the barrage of the masked leaguer. Quickly becoming exhausted, Robin used practically everything he could that was stored in his utility belt, causing the number of blondes to finally dwindle into the 30s, something Naruto thought to be rather impressive. But, time was ticking away and he still needed to deal with the last two who actually understood the point of this test, and he was sure it would take plenty more time to deal with the two than it had for the solo acts. "Always be aware of the number of your enemies," Naruto said, surprising the young hero before he called out, "Doden Shinju Zanchu no Jutsu." Robin was at a loss for words. First he's fighting Shadow's clones, which he still couldn't figure out how he made them, and then the original, he assumed, literally drags him down into the solid ground with only his head above the surface. While Robin struggled to free himself, he couldn't help but feel as though the masked blonde was smirking at his situation. "You're smarter than most, Robin. Way smarter than any of the others, I'm sure," Shadow said, "but that arrogance of yours is going to get you killed one day," he stated seriously, causing the boy to wince at his tone. It sounded eerily like Batman's when he reprimanded him over a rookie mistake. Still, not bad. All you're lacking is one vital thing. Once you figure out what that is, you'll definitely become a force to be reckoned with, he said before sending a quick blow to the back of the boy's neck, knocking him out efficiently. "I'm a bit disappointed in the baby bat. You know, so I feel like I'm missing something important." Just as Naruto left the area after dispelling the small remainder of his clones, he foolishly stepped on a tripwire, causing a net to come over his head. With no time to dodge, Naruto made a few hand seals with breakneck speed before calling out, "Kawarimi no Jutsu," and watched as the substituted piece of log was shocked silly with what was 500,000 volts of electricity. "Can't say the kid isn't prepared," Naruto thought as he looked at the flaming log with a small bead of sweat running down the side of his cheek. Still didn't help him much, Kurama growled out, annoyed that his vessel failed to see subtip wire. True. Oh well, he's out for the count and I've got a little pair of heroes waiting for me. Get going, kid. I want to see just how you handle these last two. Alright, I'm going. Training simulator, observation room. How are they doing? Black Canary, who had just arrived, asked the red-clad leaguer. Fairly well considering their opponent. However, only Calder and Megan realized the true purpose of this test. Red Tornado stated as he continued to watch the various monitors that showed each of the individual's location in the training simulator. I didn't think any of them would realize they needed to work together. Canary said aloud, wondering how the two young heroes would work together to attempt to take down Fire Shadow. Over the 2 years Shadow had been a member of the League, he had proved time and time again that he didn't need a team and could easily handle himself. However, whenever it was offered, or demanded by Batman since he wanted to keep an eye on him, Shadow would work with his teammates' strengths with mastery, and cover their weaknesses for them. He was the perfect backup and possibly the best teammate to have in any situation. While Canary and he weren't exactly the best of friends, she could say that they would trust each other with their lives. For whatever reason, he refused to speak of his life prior to heroism, though Canary did have a few theories as to why that was so. Every conversation they had together left the senior leaguer knowing that something terrible had happened to the young blonde. Despite the muffle in his voice due to the mask, she could hear the slightly broken tone that was only heard in a man, or woman, that had seen death in the worst of ways. She was certain if she had been able to see his eyes, she would have looked into ones that were haunted by the past. Red Tornado shared the same speculations of their young member. While he could not empathize with such emotions, for he had little understanding of them, he could try to sympathize with them. Though he was certain, with the way the young blonde carried himself, that he wanted no pity. Nor did I, Red Tornado said as he watched Fire Shadow walk through the trees in search for the two remaining heroes. Well, they only have a little bit longer until the alarm goes off. I wonder if Megan and Calder will succeed? Perhaps they shall. Ten says that they won't, Canary said, betting on Naruto's skill and experience over the young heroes would prevail. I do not understand, Red Tornado admitted, causing Canary to smile slightly. Never mind, Red. Let's just enjoy the show, training simulator. Which way do you think he went? Megan asked as she stood next to Calder. Every way they went it seemed they merely hit more trees. They hadn't even gotten a glimpse of their friends, though they did feel a slight rumble earlier. Is there any way you can try to locate him through your telepathy? Calder asked instead of answering her question. Hello, Megan, she said with a smile and a soft palm to her temple. I can try to connect to his mind and find him that way. For a moment, Calder looked thoughtful. Is there any way you can make it so we can keep telepathic contact? When we confront him, it would make communicating much easier. Sure. Back on Mars this is how we talk to each other. Megan spoke to Calder telepathically. However, since he wasn't expecting it so suddenly, he grasped his head in slight pain. That is good, Megan, but give others a warning before you do so. Here on Earth that would be considered a major invasion of privacy. Oh, I'm sorry, she apologized vehemently, I'll be sure to tell you from now on. Nodding, Calder continued, that would be most appreciated. Now, let us find Fire Shadow. Right. She agreed, nodding before she brought her hands to the side of her head and tried to telepathically come to contact with Fire Shadow. She let out a smile when she found him, though she felt as though something were blocking her powers. She couldn't see his thoughts, only a small flicker of emotion every now and then. It was odd. I have him. He's approximately 200 yards east from our current location, and it seems he's waiting for us, she said, letting her arms fall back down to her sides and turned to Calder. I do not know whether or not he will be prepared for the both of us. For the moment, we have the element of surprise, he said while beginning to make his way east. Right. He'll only be expecting one of us, Megan said in agreement. From what Robin has said of Fire Shadow's abilities, I do not know if he would recognize your touch of his mind. I will meet him head on while you camouflage yourself and get behind him. When you see the opportunity arise, take the bells. Understood. We're almost there, should I link us up? Yes, Calder said, preparing himself for the foreign feeling to return. Link established. Megan stated telepathically. Good, I will keep his attention, do not hesitate. Got it. She thought to him before quickly shifting to camouflage mode and swiftly but silently phasing through the trees of the forest to position herself behind Fire Shadow. She noticed that he seemed to be meditating. He was seated on the grass with his legs crossed, though she couldn't be certain as he could very well easily be watching everything as his mask hid whether or not his eyes were open. Just as she finished positioning herself, Calder walked into the open, activating his water bearers and causing Shadow to rise. Just you, Calder? He asked in what seemed to be a knowing tone. I am more than capable on my own, he replied. Well, then let's see what you've got compared to the others. With that said, Shadow positioned himself in a battle stance. As they were located far from the only source of water in the training simulator, Calder had to shift his water bearers into the hammers he was used to fighting with and move swiftly to attack the blonde. Naruto knew that Megan was positioned behind him, simply waiting for the right moment to grab a hold of the bells while he held off Calder. Taking a pair of kunai in hand, Naruto met Calder's weapons with a force that knocked him back a few feet. When Calder moved toward him again, twisting his body for more momentum and power behind his attack, Naruto swiftly moved away and brought his leg to hit the young Atlantean's head only for it to be halted by said hero's forearm. With a slight smirk, Shadow jumped back a bit and made a few hand seals until he called out, "Kaden Gukaku no Jutsu," making the Atlantean's face pale drastically before causing him to dive to the side in order to dodge the giant fireball. Kneeling on the floor, Calder looked back to the masked leaguer. He wasn't messing around. Stealing his nerves, Calder launched forward again. Megan tried to telekinetically grasp hold of the bells. "I will keep his attention even if he realizes you doing so." "On it, Calder," Megan said as her eyes glowed green. Naruto heard the jingling of the silver bells that were tied to his belt and looked down to them, realizing that they were attempting to escape by some phantom force, who happened to be named Megan. Right. She has telekinesis, he thought to himself as he took the bells in his hands, hoping to force Megan out in the open. "He's taken them in his hands, I'll try something. Be prepared to hit him," she said to Calder, who simply nodded. Naruto knew he had no hope to counter her telekinesis when she took hold of his entire body and raised him into the air and slammed him into a nearby tree, rather forcefully, before bringing him toward Calder, who prepared to hit him with his hammer as though he were nothing more than a baseball. Bringing his arm out, Naruto in the last minute was able to grasp a hold of the hammer and maneuver himself away from the blow. Rolling onto the floor, Naruto skillfully threw a small number of shuriken toward the scarcely visible Megan. The young Martian lost concentration due to the projectiles and swiftly moved to the side in all weapons, bringing her out in the open just as Naruto had hoped. With a small smirk, brought his hands to a few seals and called out, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," creating another 100 clones before making them all charge the slightly shocked pair of heroes and, in unison, screamed, "Fire Shadow Bunshin, Body Gachin." The two teens stood no chance at escaping of fighting off the blondes and ended up crushed beneath them, suffering a number of punches and kicks at the same time. When Fire Shadow dispelled his clones and looked at the nearly unconscious pair, he was about to comment on their execution until a rather loud alarm filled their ears, causing both Megan and Calder to realize that they had failed. "Well, looks like time's up," Naruto said in a rather happy tone before walking up to the fallen heroes and offered them his hands, which were taken appreciatively. Once they all stood, he continued, "Let's go grab the rest of your friends and I'll let you all know what happens now since you all failed." "You mean none of us could get the stinking bells?" Wally exclaimed with a small wet towel on his nose that was helping rid his face of the blood. "Yes, we all have failed," Calder said in a solemn tone. "At least none of you were dragged into the ground," Robin bit out. He was still frustrated that he, 1, couldn't get the bell, and 2, he couldn't get himself out of the earth even after he regained consciousness. It had been Shadow who helped him out. Superboy and Megan both decided not to say anything, though for different reasons. Superboy was beyond annoyed that he was beaten by such a weak-looking guy. Though, inwardly he was wondering if the blonde had meant what he said before he lost consciousness. Could he really surpass Superman? Even when it seemed he had neither heat vision or the ability to fly? Megan, on the other hand, felt that she was a few words away from being sent back to Mars. She had a chance to be a part of a team here on Earth, the planet she had dreamed about visiting forever. She had a chance to make friends, to be equal with the people here, and she failed. Noticing the tension, Naruto decided to speak up. "Yes, you all failed. Anyone have a theory as to why you did?" he asked the heroes. "Because you're stronger than us," Megan said a bit softly. "Individually, yes, I am stronger than you, but that's not why you failed." "Anyone else?" When no one raised their voices, he continued, "The reason none of you were able to even touch the bells was because you didn't work together," he said, causing a few eyes to widen. "Megan and Calder were the only ones to come at me together, and I had to keep my wits about me during my time with them, while when I fought against you three," he said, pointing to Superboy, Wally, and Robin, "I didn't really have to put that much effort." The Justice League faces against villains who are hell-bent on world domination, or mass destruction. Going off on your own doesn't help. It'll only get you killed. No hero, not even the Man of Steel himself, can do everything alone. That's why we work together. "Give us another chance, this time we won't fail," Wally screamed out. "Just one more time?" Robin asked. Getting nods from the rest of the small band of heroes, Naruto inwardly smirked. It was strange how they reacted so similar to how he and his team had when they had failed the test. "All right," he said, receiving wide smiles in return. "However, I did state at the beginning of the test that only 4 of you would be on the team. I'm giving you 5 minutes to choose who won't be on the team." "What? That's not fair. Life is unfair. Get used to it, kid," Naruto said sternly. "No, I will not make such a decision," Calder said with a firm voice. "Neither will I," Wally said, sounding uncharacteristically serious. We never wanted to work with the League anyways. Superboy stated with his arms crossed as he stood side by side with his teammates. He wasn't about to abandon them. They were the sole reason he wasn't still with Cadmus, the reason he wasn't the weapon he was meant to be. They were his new family and home. I won't either. I won't do that to my friends, Megan said with as much courage as she could muster. Times like this, Shadow was rather intimidating. Naruto looked at the 5 young heroes with a small smile, though he made sure his voice didn't give way to it. I see, he said in a calm, almost cold voice that made the heroes slightly fearful for some reason. Then I can only do one thing, he said, pausing dramatically, as Kakashi had simply for fun, and even let out a slight killer intent just for effect. I have to pass you, he said, a smile sounding clear in his voice, and recalled the killer intent as he watched Wally face plants into the grass and the other heroes looked taken back. What? Megan asked confused. I'm afraid I do not understand, Calder admitted. If you all decided to kick one of you out, then you would have failed, for you wouldn't have what it takes to be a functional team. But you didn't, you stuck together and refused to betray one another. So congratulations, you are all now officially the Young Justice team. Naruto finished with a wide grin plastered on his face, though he knew that no one would be able to see it. When the news finally sunk in the 5 heroes, they mirrored his unseen grin and Wally jumped up in the air in a victorious pose. Now, I don't know about you, but I could go for a few bowls of ramen, Naruto stated happily at the excited teens. Oh, I'll bake cookies and make us lunch, Megan said happily as she began to float, looking as though she was barely controlling the urge to speed off into the kitchen. Sounds great, Megan, Naruto said, heading toward the exit. Come on, I'm sure you're all just as hungry. You bet, Wally said, racing out of the training simulator, a happy Martian girl trailing after him. While they were walking toward the kitchen, Naruto couldn't help but smile. He had a few doubts about training and supervising this team, but it seemed as though they were baseless. While each hero had their faults, they had the potential to surpass their mentors and become a great team. They'll all do great things one day, he thought contently. The future was definitely going to be interesting. Chapter 4. Welcome to Happy Harbor. Mount Justice, July 16, 12 o'clock EDT. Again. Fire Shadow demanded of Team Young Justice, who were currently fighting the urge to collapse on the floor. They had been training all morning since the crack of dawn, nearly 6 hours since they had began. None of the teens really knew what to expect when they passed Fire Shadow's test, but if the test was any indication, it would be tough. Tough was an understatement, it was torture. From the moment they walked into the training simulator, which had taken the form of a large gym equipped with various obstacles, Shadow had started them off by stretching for a good 40 minutes. At first they were confused why they had taken double the normal time of stretching, only to realize he had a reason for doing so. He was pushing their muscles to their limits. First, a 30-minute run, which would have been particularly easy, had they not been forced to sprint the entire time or face the wrath of Shadow's rubber balls of fury. Whenever they lost a bit of speed, Naruto would bombard them with small rubber balls in order to push them to maintain their speed. Kid Flash thought he was going to breeze right through the run. He was the fastest kid alive after all. A 30-minute sprint wouldn't be too taxing. Maybe cause him to eat an entire buffet later, but hardly difficult. That is, he thought it would be. Fire Shadow knew that this sort of exercise would be nothing for the young speedster, and prepared beforehand. He had the young teen dressed in a weighted bodysuit, making him weigh roughly 300 pounds. After the run, the boy was sweating as much, if not more so, than his other teammates. Of course, Naruto couldn't leave the young Kryptonian clone without something that would cause the training to sink in. Thanks to a little digging around, Naruto was able to come into possession of a shard of kryptonite, Kryptonian's mortal weakness. Rather than simply placing it on him and hope for the best, Naruto asked the Kyuubi for help on duplicating its effects into a seal in order to, in a sense, level out the playing field. He had placed it in Superboy's training shirt, a shirt that was given to each of the members as they were also slightly weighted. When the young Kryptonian asked what it was, Naruto had answered honestly, omitting exactly how he had created the seal, of course. He couldn't exactly let out all of his secrets after all. Though Shadow had to give it to Robin in his rather cunning ways of asking questions which to an ordinary person would have fooled them to say exactly what he wanted to hear unknowingly. Naruto knew that once Batman looked through the training sessions videos, he would come to the right conclusion that he had an unknown amount of kryptonite in his possession, and, more than probably not, up his surveillance on him. It wouldn't be that hard for a master detective to deduce that much. That, or believe that Superboy wasn't full Kryptonian, which could be the actual case now that Naruto thought about it. Either way, Shadow didn't particularly care. He simply wanted to teach and train the young heroes so that they wouldn't one day lose their lives on the job as some have, regardless of the methods he would have to use. Without crossing the line, of course. He would rather rot in hell than see himself turn into Danzo. A while after they completed the sprint, Shadow had them go through 2 obstacle courses multiple times, with each run through slightly different than the last. The first base course was a rather simple one compared to the others. A timed course that consisted of monkey bars, a high wall to climb, a mud pit they had to crawl themselves through without getting hurt, or caught by the lowly hung net of barbed wire, and finally a simple run through a treadmill going the opposing direction. The second was more difficult. Unlike the first, the obstacles were more intricate. While it still had the same course, dozens of traps were laid flawlessly throughout it. From tripwires, to weighted sensors that triggered a blaze of shuriken to elemental jutsus. All of which were illusions of course, and would simply splat paint on the person should they be caught in it and feel something equal of hammers slamming into them. He wasn't out to kill his team after all. Of course, after finishing the second obstacle course, each young hero simply knew without a shadow of a doubt that their new head supervisor was a sadist. While they had breaks between the blocks of exercises, where Shadow provided them with water, energy boosters, and offered each of them a very low-level stamina pill to each of them so they could continue, the young heroes still felt as though they were just about ready to collapse. "Come on team, one more quick run and we can all call it a day," Naruto said, hoping it would motivate the team to finish the last exercise, which was a quick combination of jumping jacks, push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups. He had watered down his original training regime for the team, knowing they wouldn't be able to handle the stress of his so early off in their training. While his team was sweating what seemed to be every last drop of water their bodies carried, Naruto was sweating only a fair amount that seemed down his mask. There were a few surprised faces when Naruto told the team at the beginning of the morning that he would be joining them in their training. Simply because he was training them didn't mean he couldn't use the opportunity to train himself. After all, there was always someone better and always ways to better yourself. Though throughout it, he cursed himself for donning the full face mask. The thing was not made for good ventilation. Of course, Kurama had scolded him for acting so weak. Even though they were mutual allies and some sort of friend to each other, they still bickered as though he were still a 13-year-old kid. Though now it held little to no malice and ill intent. The bickering was more for the sake of keeping normalcy in the universe that was not their own. When Shadow received weak groans as a reply, Naruto and the team finally finished their training and the young heroes couldn't hold back the need to fall on the floor panting heavily. Robin was currently wondering how Fire Shadow, who seemed particularly laid back when not fighting, could possibly be more of a slave driver than Batman. He thought that Bruce's training regimes were taxing, but Shadow's made his training session simply blew everything Bruce had thrown at him out of the water. Superboy, while panting and sweating slightly, was ransacking his knowledge of Superman and trying to figure out just how he was sweating. Everything he knows about the man clearly state that he's practically invincible and nowhere does it state that he sweats. Could Shadow have been wrong when he said he could surpass Superman? He couldn't fly, he didn't have heat vision or arctic breath, and he sweat. The other young heroes were far too exhausted to even wonder such thoughts about their new head supervisor. But one thought did run through their minds, and that was that even though this training was harsher than the Arctic winds in the heart of winter, this was helping them become stronger, and that much closer to the league. "Good job, team," Naruto said with a happy tone. "Honestly, I half expected you all to bail out halfway through, but you surprised and impressed me by not giving up." While the group of teens were exhausted, they managed to grow small grins on their faces at the praise. They felt as though they had passed another test from their new head supervisor, and it felt nice. "Cool down and head to the showers. I'll be out on league business till tomorrow night, so you probably won't see me. Either way, this training regime you all faced today will be the standard from now on, and whatever Black Canary will want from you every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday with some lightweight training on the other days. When I come back, I don't want to hear anything about misbehaving or disrespect, otherwise you'll see your body past its limits," Naruto said in a calm, chilling voice that practically screamed doom to all those who didn't obey him. Wisely, the teens all nodded in agreement and watched as their head supervisor left the room, letting the young heroes calm their muscles and breathing before they left themselves. "Observation deck. That was a bit much, don't you think?" The melodic voice of Black Canary rang through the metal walls of the halls, ringing into Shadow's ears. "Not really. You and I have done training worse than that," Naruto replied with a smirk evident in his tone. "They're just kids, Shadow. Ease them into it," she added in a soft yet stern voice. Naruto, though his face was completely covered, let his face grow cold and his aura darken. "They haven't been kids since they donned the masks, Canary. They want to be a part of the league, then they need to see exactly just what they're getting themselves into. You saw them in there, Black. That team has everything it takes to be members of the league except experience. The determination is testament to that. All they need to really work on is their teamwork. I'm not going to let themselves believe that they're ready for something they're not. I will not allow them to die simply because I was too easy on them." Canary, at that point, realized she had said the wrong thing. The past couple years she had gotten to know Shadow was that he took their work seriously. At times, she thought, equal to Batman's seriousness, if not more so. While it was clear in his movements that he had faced more than a few life and death situations, she didn't know just how many, and who he had lost during those times. With an apologetic expression, she said, "All right, I understand. I won't question it from now on." Nodding, Shadow made his way toward the Zeta tubes. "Thank you, Canary," he said with a calm tone before the computer recognized him and he was engulfed into the light and brought directly to the watchtower. Time to get to work. Stop whining and get to it," Kurama growled slightly. With a small sigh, Shadow walked forward and went to see what Green Arrow wanted from him. Star City, July 17, 2316 Pacific Daylight Saving Time. "You again? I'm starting to get insulted that Green Arrow's not messing up my operations personally," screamed a thug at a newly solo act known as Speedy. Said young man merely glared, fresh resentments shining through at the mention of his past mentor. As the thug began shooting at him, Speedy expertly dodged and managed to fire an exploding arrow at the firearm, destroying it, and in the process, ruining the thug's suit, which apparently was expensive for a man his size. Before Speedy was overwhelmed, a blur of red and gold knocked a couple of the lackeys down, and batarangs thrown by a small laughing teenage boy knocked out a couple more before a rather serious-looking Aqualad took down the remaining thugs with his water bearers. The head of the operation had since removed the remnants of his shirt and began to lift parts of the concrete floor and threw it at the kids who decided to play hero. "The cave is perfect. It has everything the team will need," Calder aka Aqualad said to Speedy after cutting through a thrown concrete boulder with his water bearer. "For covert missions. You know, spy stuff," Robin said with a bit of enthusiasm at the hope of his longtime friend at joining their newly formed team. Ever since the fiasco at the Hall of Justice, Speedy had become estranged and wanted nearly nothing to do with any of the League, including League member protégés like Calder, KF, and he. "And wait until you see Superboy and Miss Martian. But I saw her first," Wally said, adding his 2 cents into the conversation before all of them dodged the coming boulder the thug threw at them. Speedy, ever quick with his bow, shot 3 exploding arrows that stuck onto the thug's chest before exploding in concession to their attachment on his body. The explosions only seemed to annoy the thug rather than actually bring him down. Rather cockily, he said, "Hee, tell Arrow he shouldn't send boys to do a mon's job." While Speedy readied another arrow, "Go ahead," he finished while spreading his arms out, leaving him wide open. With narrowed eyes, Speedy sent the arrow flying. Knowing the thug was expecting another explosion, he was slightly satisfied with his look of shock as the arrow exploded into foam, spreading over the thug's entire body until it fully covered him, ending the fight. "High-density polyurethane foam. Nice, Kid Flash observed while impressed at his friend's choice of arrow. "So Speedy, you in?" Robin asked with a hopeful tone. "Pass," Speedy said with finality. "I'm done letting Arrow and the League telling me what to do. I don't need a babysitter or a clubhouse handout with the other kids. Your Junior Justice League is a joke. Something to keep you busy and in your place. I don't want any part of it," he finished with much venom lacing his voice. While the young hero was engulfed in the shadows, leaving the 3 remaining heroes behind, a fox-masked man walked over to the young archer, causing him to stop in his path. "Is there something you want, Fire Shadow?" Speedy asked the masked leaguer with slight anger in his voice. "Sure, a lot of things," Shadow replied with a small shrug. "I could go for a nice bowl of miso ramen right now." With a small exasperated sigh, Speedy clarified, "I meant something from me, Shadow." "What? I can't just stop by and visit a friend," Shadow said with mock hurt in his voice. "I am not your friend, Shadow," Speedy hissed out with narrowed eyes, his grip on his bow tightening. "Alright," he conceded, "I'll stop bullshitting then," Naruto said with a sigh before getting serious. "Technically, I'm on an official League assignment to extend a hand and offer you a place on the Young Justice team," he finished with a dulled tone to his voice. "Something tells me you don't want me on the team," Speedy said with a cold voice. "Of course I don't want you on the team," Shadow said nonchalantly, causing the young archer to tense with anger, for several reasons in fact. Firstly, you don't want to be on the team. Secondly, you want to be a solo act without the League on your back. And thirdly, you don't need much direction. You already know what you want and have a plan on how to prove that to everyone else. While there is a major need for a long-distance fighter on the team, I'm not going to deal with someone who doesn't want to be a part of it. All that'll do is cause problems later on." After his explanation, Speedy's shoulders relaxed. Finally, he thought, someone who gets it. Then, thanks for the offer, but no thanks, he said with a small nod of respect to the leaguer. Speedy had met the guy when Green Arrow and he accompanied him on an assignment to prevent a large drug shipment and take down the leader of the cartel behind the shipments. Back then, he looked onto the young leaguer with awe. It was obvious he was powerful, and he worked perfectly in sync with Green Arrow and he felt as though they had been working together for years. He was the perfect teammate. "No problem, Speedy," Shadow replied with a small shrug, "though, if you ever change your mind, you are always welcome, and if you ever need anything from me, don't hesitate to ask." With a small nod of his head, Roy Harper watched as Fire Shadow disappeared in a swirl of leaves and smoke. "I'll be sure to remember that, Shadow," Speedy thought before he too returned to the shadows and left in the night. Mount Justice, July 18, 11:16 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Recognized. Robin, B01. Kid Flash, B03. As the light from the Zeta tube disappeared and brought forth the two young heroes, Robin wasted no time in running toward his friends that remained standing by a large monitor. "Did you ask him?" the teenager asked with a small smile. "What did he say?" followed Kid Flash's question as he jogged over to his teammates. Taking notice of his friend's arrival, Calder answered, "He is arriving now. He being none other than Red Tornado." "Wait for," Kid Flash continued before speeding his way toward their front door. When the team made its way outside, they were met with a small tornado and Red riding it before he landed on the grass in front of them. "Greetings," the leaguer said politely. "Is there a reason you intercepted me outside the cave?" he queried the team. Robin, taking initiative, said, "We were hoping you had a mission for us." Red Tornado looked at the other members of the team and saw that they all were hoping that he'd say yes. Answering honestly, he said, "You know that is his Fire Shadow's duty to assign team missions as he is head supervisor." Getting a small groan from Robin, the teenager said with frustration lacing his voice, "It's been a week," which it had since their little Cadmus debacle, and that technically speaking, had been a self-assigned mission for poetic justice. Knowing that nothing short of a mission would appease the young heroes, Red Tornado began to take his leave before saying, "You will be tested soon enough. Until that time, perhaps you should use this time to take pleasure in each other's company." Now, fully frustrated and reminded of what Speedy had told them the night before, Calder said stiffly, "This team is not a social club." Turning, the leaguer said, "No, but I understand from Fire Shadow that team interaction is a good teamwork exercise. Perhaps you should take this day off from your training and learn more about each other." With that, Red makes his way to the open door and is recognized by the computer before leaving the young heroes outside completely. "Does he really expect us to believe that?" Kid Flash said, annoyed at their lack of missions. "Oh, let me find out," Megan offered, reaching out to the leaguer telepathically before continuing in a dejected voice, "I am sorry, I forgot he is a machine. Inorganic. I cannot read his mind." "It was a good try, though," Kid Flash said comfortingly with a hand placed on her green shoulder. With his arms crossed over his chest and an annoyed expression smothering his face, Calder said, "And now we tour the clubhouse," with frustration lacing his tone. Trying to diffuse the obvious tense feeling in the air about them, Megan said, "Well, me and Superboy live here, maybe we could be your tour guides?" Taking slightly pensive expressions, the rest of the team turned to look at the young Kryptonian who merely shrugged his shoulders and firmly stated, "Don't look at me." While he didn't have anything better to do, he wasn't about to play tour guide to the rest of his team. They could take a look around the cave the same way he had. Exploration. "Don't have to," Wally said with a wide mischievous grin toward Miss M. "Private tour guide sounds like fun." He finished with what he thought to be a suave tone of voice. Slightly sputtering at the subtle insinuation Robin knew Megan would innocently miss, he exclaimed, "She never said anything about it being private." "Team building," Calder said in a calm commanding voice that brought the rest of his teammates' attention to him. "We'll all go." The Atlantean finished with the same commanding voice that left nothing up for debate. Quickly afterwards, Megan began to show them around the cave, from the front door to the bedrooms, and everything in between. While she knew she couldn't cover everything as the cave was rather large, she managed to show the most important of areas until Superboy's voice broke through her musings. Sniffing the air slightly, Superboy said in a slightly confused and curious voice, "I smell smoke." With an ever so slightly horrified gasp, Miss M exclaimed in a panicked tone, "My cookies." Without another word, Megan flew with haste to the kitchen and telekinetically opened the oven door to place the burnt tray of cookies on the counter. Just as soon as the tray hit the marble, the rest of her teammates had entered the kitchen and looked at the small flat circles of char with slight amusement. "I'm sorry," Miss M apologized, "I wanted to make you all cookies." "Do not worry about it, Megan," Calder said with a grateful smile, "it is the thought that matters." "Yeah," Robin added with a smile gracing his teenage face, "besides, the cookies you made us last time with Shadow were great, and it doesn't look like Wally minds." He finished with a definite smirk looking at his speedster of a friend that had 2 charred cookies in hand while taking bites from them each. Noticing that the attention of his friends were on him completely, Wally looked sheepish before admitting, I have a serious metabolism," which was true. At the speed he moved his body, calories were of constant need due to the speed that the young man worked them off. While his eating habits were unsightly, the need for nutrition was an absolute must. As his teammates laughed, Superboy brought up a topic that everyone else had been curious about as well. Still wondering how Shadow managed to eat with his mask completely on, he said with a slightly annoyed huff. "I know," Wally exclaimed after finishing his 3rd charred cookie, "I was so looking forward to seeing what he really looked like too." The rest of the team nodded as they too had hoped their head supervisor would take off his mask to eat. Of course, with everything else he was capable of, Shadow had managed to eat 3 large plates of the food Megan had made without so much as touching his mask. It was as if there were an invisible hole whenever he took a piece of food into his mouth that none of them could see. Even as they stared intently, none of them could quite recall just what they had seen. It was absolutely frustrating. I wonder why he chooses not to show his face. I know from Uncle Jean that some members of the league let their secret identities be known to each other, but Shadow has always been recluse. Superboy snorted, sure didn't seem recluse when he talked non-stop at lunch. He said, which was true. During the lunch their mysterious head supervisor hadn't stayed silent for long, bringing up stories about the Justice League that none of them had heard, telling jokes, and overall having a good time with them. What they didn't know was that Naruto had realized how lonely he had been the past 2 years during that lunch. Dealing with so many adults constantly had caused him to miss interaction with those closer to his age. Roy Harper, aka Speedy, was really the only teen hero that was closest to his age, and he wasn't exactly his friend, as the Archer so liked to state. Yeah, from everything I had from Bats, I thought he was going to be different, Robin said with a thoughtful expression. Everything the young teen had expected their head supervisor to be was completely thrown out the window during their belt test of humiliation. While the young boy had in fact been on a mission or two with the youngest member of the league, he certainly didn't act anything like he did with them here. Maybe he just doesn't like Batman. Knowing Bruce, he would have done something to annoy Shadow. Robin pondered over the thought before Calder spoke, breaking his musings. I, too, expected something different of Shadow, he said. My king explained that he was a complicated individual, but I did not expect him to be so eccentric, Robin supplied just as Kid Flash said, sadistic? With an amused smirk that matched Superboy's and Megan's, Kadur finished, friendly. Though those do describe him rather well, he admitted. Well, coming from Mars, I didn't know what to expect of him, but he is a great teacher. Megan added with a small smile as she watched Kid Flash finish the last of her forgotten attempt at cookies. Cadmus couldn't supply much about him, but he is strong, Superboy said. While he didn't want to admit it, it was evidently clear that Shadow outmatched him in strength by a long shot. But he knew that the training their head supervisor was making them do would help him greatly. Yet another reason why he begrudgingly respected the man. Sue, who do you think would win in a fight? Supermash asked, truly curious. The Man of Steel against the Enigma of the Justice League. That would be the battle of the century. Who knows? The mini ninja said with a small shrug, though I'm betting on Shadow. Everyone knows Superman's strengths and weaknesses. Shadow on the other hand. Well, no one really knows everything about his powers other than himself. So no one can know what else he has up his sleeves. For all we know, he could spout kryptonite gas from his mouth. Robin said. While he respected Superman, Shadow was the Fire Shadow. However young, he was completely unpredictable. Well, we toured most of the clubhouse, Kid Flash said, a bit annoyed. What else is there to do? Oh, I know what we can do, Megan stated excitedly before floating off with a small yell of, come on, to her teammates, knowing they would follow. When the rest of her team had caught up to her, they were in what they presumed to be the hangar bay that would exit to the bay outside. In the center of the large oval piece of metal, shining a nice red. It's my Martian bioship, the Martian said happily, motioning toward the piece of metal. Cute. Not aerodynamic, but cute, Wally said with a slight shrug. Laughing a bit, Megan said, it's at rest, silly. I'll wake it, with a mental command. The small oval piece of metal morphed into a fairly large red ship. Turning to her gawking friends, she asked, well, are you coming? With her friends closely behind her, she walked into the ship and sent out another command that brought up the pilot seat, and 4 other seats for her team. Strap in for launch, she said, taking the pilot seat. Whoa! Robin exclaimed when all of a sudden black straps crossed over his chest in a seatbelt-like manner on their own. Cool, was Kid Flash's reaction to the same thing. What can he say? Technology was simply amazing like that. What else could be expected from Martian technology? Red Tornado, please open the bay doors, Megan asked, and soon enough the team was off flying through the surrounding area aimlessly. Incredible. Robin breathed out. The Bat's ship had nothing on Megan's. She sure is, Kid Flash said unknowingly. When both Megan and Robin looked at him questioningly, he quickly added a bit lamely, I mean the ship, like all ships, is a she. Snickering, Robin said to Megan, fast with his feet, but not so much with his mouth. Dude, KFEXLC aimed with a pink twinge on his cheeks. Hey, Robin said to Megan, show us some Martian shape-shifting. Smiling amused, Miss M morphed her entire body into that of a female Robin and then turned to change into Kid Flash before reverting back into her normal green self. Nice. Robin commented with a few claps of applause, but you know you're not going to fool anyone with those, he said, talking about how it was blatantly obvious she was a female version of themselves, rather than male. Slightly downtrodden, she said, mimicking boys is a lot harder. With a wide grin, Kid Flash said, maybe you should ask Shadow. He can turn into a really pretty girl. When his friends looked at him with smirks of their own, Kid turned a red that matched his hair before groaning to himself. When Robin had managed to get the video from their bell test with Shadow that they quickly and silently deemed the day of humiliation, He had shown it to all of them under the partial guise that they could better themselves by looking at their mistakes. In reality, Robin just really wanted to see what the other members of his team had to go through, while expertly omitting his last moments with Shadow. So, the entire team saw how Kid Flash lost from a nosebleed when their head supervisor turned into a nude, while attractive, girl. "You know, that is not a bad suggestion," Calder said after chuckling at his friend. "While I am unsure if it is the same as your shape-shifting, he may have good pointers for your benefit." "You're right," Megan said happily. "I'll ask him the next time we train with him." "Oh, can you do that ghosting through walls that Manhunter does?" KF asked excitedly. "Density shifting?" The young Martian asked for clarification. "No. That is a very advanced technique," she admitted. As hard as she tried, that particular technique was still a bit too much for her. Chuckling a bit, Robin said, "Flash can vibrate his molecules through a solid wall." Snickering, the team finished. "When he tries it, bloody nose." "Dude," Wally exclaims, even more embarrassed. Before anyone could say anything else, Fire Shadow's voice broke through the comm. "Team," he said in his usual muffled voice, "there has been a disturbance at the harbor power plant. Investigate covertly and I trust you all will be able to deal with the problem, whatever it may be should the situation arise. I am sending you the coordinates now." "Received. Adjusting course," Megan said in a serious tone before turning the ship toward Happy Harbor in New England. "Finally, a mission," Robin said with excitement. "What do you think caused the alert?" Miss M asked. I think I know the cause," Superboy said while silently motioning outside the window. There, just outside the window was said power plant with explosions setting off in various areas. Soon after that was said, she brought the ship down to land so that the team could exit and move toward whatever was causing this. "Wait," Calder said to his teammates as soon as they exited, stopping a 13-year-old in his attempt to see the problem alone. "We should deal with this as a team." "Right, what Shadow said," Robin said, quickly berating himself for almost running off alone, something Shadow had told him specifically not to do at that lunch. "Hey Suppy, can you use your X-ray vision to see the disturbance?" Kid Flash asked, putting on his own goggles in preparation. Nodding, the young clone looked into the building and said, "It looks like a girl, masked face, and is carrying two say." "Alright, we surround and subdue. Stick together and we cannot allow civilians to get caught in crossfire, so we must maintain ourselves in a certain area until they are evacuated." "Right," Robin agreed. "Megan, go camouflage mode, keep out of sight and use your telekinesis to fight." "Understood," she said, bringing her hood over her head before turning invisible to the untrained eye. "Then let us move out," Calder said before running with his team to the power plant. Mount Justice observation deck. Back at the cave, two figures stood in front of multiple monitors that displayed live footage of the dealings at Happy Harbor and watched with a keen eye as their new charges dealt with the situation. Due to the explosions, all the security cameras inside the plant were either destroyed or damaged, so they had to wait for their team, as both Robin and Kid Flash had tiny cameras on their sunglasses, goggles, to enter before they saw what caused all this mayhem. "Are you sure it is wise to leave them to deal with the situation alone?" Red Tornado queried the youngest leaguer. While he had 2 years to learn about the newest member of the league, he realized that in the past few days he had learned more about the young man than in the past 2 years. And as much as he trusted his teammate, he could not help but question whether or not his judgment was sound in this situation. The team was brand spanking new, and the teen heroes had only spent 1 day of actual training with their head supervisor. While their work at Cadmus Labs was impressive, they still didn't know what caused the disturbance, and whatever it was could very well be over their heads in terms of skill. Not looking away from the many screens as he watched his students talk to each other, making a plan as a team should, Naruto answered, "I have complete faith in the team. They are after all being trained by me, and all of my students are just awesome." "Careful, Gaki. You're starting to sound like your old idiotic self," Kurama said in amusement. "Oh shut up, furball. I meant it, all of my students are just amazingly awesome." Whatever, Kit. THT his container sans the venom as once had before. "If you are certain, then I am sure they will be fine," Red Tornado concluded. "Of course they will be," Naruto replied, quickly dropping his mental conversation with Kurama at the sounds of Red's slightly automated voice. "Then let us return to watch their progress." With a small nod of his head, Naruto said, "Yes, let's." Happy Harbor. As soon as they all enter the factory, each in different spots to cover all exits and surround their target, they were slightly surprised by who they were up against. The woman was approximately 5 feet 6 inches, wore a white mask that was carved with a wicked-looking grin, red markings on the cheeks and one straight down the forehead, and black hair flowing down her back. She wore a dark green kimono with slight rips and tears through it along with black high-knee boots. My, such little heroes. Out here. All alone," spoke the woman. While her face was completely hidden, the smirk in her voice was evident. "Hey, we are Sue not little," Kid Flash exclaimed, unable to keep it in. "What do you want?" Calder asked with a commanding voice. "Wouldn't you just love to know?" she said, twirling her sei in her hands. Enough of this. Superboy practically screams before he runs in and tries to punch her stupid mask off her face. Quickly, the girl jumps over the raging clone, kicking his back in the process and sending him into the wall painfully. Bringing out her shuriken, she throws them quickly at Aqualad before she hits the floor, only to see them be sent back at her by an unknown force. Dodging the projectiles with quick reflexes, she also cuts off both attacks from the speedster and bird rangs sent by Robin in quick succession. This is getting a bit too interesting, she said with a dry voice, her body in a tight defensive position. Who are you? Screamed Calder. Not bothering to answer his question, the masked woman said, tell Shadow to meet me at our old spot tomorrow at 6 p.m. Or else I plaster all of his little secrets for everyone to see. With that message and threat said, she threw down a smoke pellet and vanished as though she were never there in the first place, leaving 5 concerned and frustrated teenagers in the factory. Mount Justice observation deck, isn't she? Kurama asked with annoyance laced in his growl. Yeah, she is, thought Naruto. With a heavy sigh, he turned away from his fellow leaguer and left the cave without another word. This just got a lot more complicated. Chapter 5. Reactions. Mount Justice Game Center, July 22, 1800 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Hey, Soupy. Come on and try this with us, yelled an excited Kid Flash. After their Happy Harbor mission, he had flashed throughout the entire cave and discovered that there was a game room in the making, and he'd been waiting days till it was finally open for their use. The room was fitted with the biggest screen he had ever seen. Bigger than some of the screens in the observation deck. They had gotten all of the latest game consoles as well as the latest and most popular of games. Apparently, it was Shadow who had asked for the room to be built, and personally put the money forth for everything that went into the room. The cost must have been a small fortune. Wally had to wonder though, where had Shadow gotten the money to buy all of it? Heroes were voluntary help, for lack of a better word. They worked for free simply to help the citizens of the world in hopes of bringing them a safer and brighter future. The only logical explanation was that Shadow did have a secret identity and some sort of job that coughed up a lot of dough. Robin was the one who brought up that if he did have a secret identity, Batman was losing his touch since he still hadn't learned much about their head supervisor. Of course, none of them would ever say that to his face. Superboy looked over to his fellow teammates with a neutral gaze. He hadn't been programmed with the information needed to play the game consoles. Cadmus had given him the necessary information and knowledge to replace Superman if it ever became necessary, not have fun. It is enjoyable, Superboy. I find myself surprised by the surface world's progress in technology, Aqualad said with a smile on his face. Come on SB, let's see those Kryptonian skills in Black Ops, Robin added with a smirk on his face as he leaned over the head of the couch to face the young clone. Fine. The young clone grounded out, taking a seat next to Aqualad, and took hold of the controller while mimicking the way Wally held it. After a while, Wally erupted into laughter. Dude, you suck, he said teasingly. Whatever. I'm done with this, Superboy said, thoroughly frustrated and slightly angered. He was a Kryptonian, a weapon, who cared about video games. Ah, come on SB, he's only teasing, Robin told the irate clone. I thought you did great, Superboy, Megan said with a shy smile. K. Wonder if we could get Shadow to try, Wally thought out loud as he continued to play the game. No way, Robin protested, he'd probably make it into some sort of training exercise. I do not believe he would, Calder said, though he wasn't all too sure if he believed himself. As they trained more with the leaguer, it was clear that he was completely unpredictable. After all, he managed to turn a regular slip-and slide into a plastic slide of doom. Wally was never going to look at his childhood pastime the same again. Where is Shadow anyway? Wally asked his team members. After training earlier in the day, their head supervisor had disappeared completely. Dunno, Robin admitted. Think it has to do with that chick we met at Happy Harbor? It was only a few days ago, Wally said to the 13-year-old. It is a possibility. When he returned to the cave the morning after their supposed meeting, he was strange, Calder added. Strange? The guy was practically devoid of all emotion, Wally exclaimed. He and his teammates had been thoroughly concerned about their head supervisor when he returned for their training the day following his supposed meeting with the masked woman. No matter what they said, the leaguer would tell them in a monotone voice that it doesn't concern them, so they didn't need to know. Whatever happened managed to rattle Shadow badly. He's never had his emotions so in check before, not even around Batman. The rest of the team nodded at their youngest teammate in agreement. They had seen how their supervisor acted around the Dark Knight. He was controlled, careful, and at times, cold. But nothing they had seen compared even closely to how Shadow was that day. It doesn't matter, he can take care of himself, Superboy said, albeit hesitantly. Despite not believing their supervisor that it didn't concern them, he couldn't do anything about it. Wally looked pensive for a moment, until he turned to Robin and asked, Hey, Rob, did you by any chance check to see the databanks if that masked ninja chick was in them? Robin looked to his red-haired friend before smacking himself in the face with his palm. Stupid, how could I forget to do that? He berated himself before immediately running to the nearest computer to check. Honestly, that should have been the first thing to do after that day. Instead, he let his thoughts wander over the bats and the conversation they had back at Wayne Manor. Bringing up a few screens, Robin began to type at incredible speeds, bypassing the few security blocks that denied him the full access he needed. Noting silently that the rest of his teammates surrounded him and smirking at Megan's gasp in awe, he brought up the right files and grinned in satisfaction. Codename, Cheshire. Robin said out loud as he stared at the picture of the woman they all had faced briefly at the Happy Harbor power plant. Whoa. She's associated with the League of Shadows, he said with wide eyes. What's Shadow doing meeting with a person like her? Wally said in confusion. You don't think he's… No, Calder said with conviction, noting where Kid Flash was going with his unfinished statement. Fire Shadow would not work for the League of Shadows. Well, there has to be some sort of an explanation for why he met with her. There is. A familiar muffled voice broke their musings, and the team slowly turned to see the masked face of their head supervisor. And like I said before, you do not need to know what it was about. Unlike the first time he had told them, this time his voice was harsh and cold. I had thought you would respect that. I can see I was wrong. Shadow finished with absolute disappointment that made the young heroes feel thoroughly ashamed. We're sorry, Shadow. We only wanted to know so we could help, Megan said in a soft tone that was on the verge of cracking. She hated to disappoint people. She never wanted to hurt him, to make him hate her or the team. Be that as it may, Naruto grounded out, that doesn't change the fact that none of you respected my privacy. I know you had to bypass more than a couple of security blocks to get that particular information. Robin could feel Shadow's glare directed at him. After all, he was the hacker of the group, and Shadow knew it. Why don't you just tell us what happened? Superboy asked in an agitated tone, though he too was feeling a twinge of guilt. Because while I trust you all with my life, I do not believe any of you should be privy to my personal life. Shadow said to the team, stop looking into it. None of you need to know how I know her, what happened, or my past. He finished with a finality that didn't let any of the team question him further. I wanted to inform you personally that you will be deployed on a covert mission in half an hour. Get ready and meet in the observation deck then. Without another word, Shadow left the young heroes to prepare. Observation deck, Shadow, they just want to help. Canary's voice broke Naruto out of his thoughts. Turning to the blonde, he sighed. He knew that the teens had good intentions, along with hoping to sat their curiosity, but that didn't change the fact that they not only hacked their databanks, but also invaded his privacy. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. He quoted with such certainty that one couldn't help but believe it to be the truth. They should not involve themselves in something that does not concern them, nor should you. With her own sigh, she said, I know you don't like talking about your past, Shadow, but I'm always here for you if you ever need to talk. I know, Canary, Naruto said in a soft tone, as appreciated. But you won't? No, he said after a short pause, you should not be burdened with my past. Shadow, recognize. Batman 02. Red Tornado 16. The automated tone of the cave's computer interrupted Black Canary and both leaguers turned to watch as Batman and Red Tornado walked out of the Zeta tube light and into the cave. Has the team been informed? Batman inquired in his usual dark, commanding tone. Yes, they are getting ready now, Canary answered politely. HN. Batman grunted before turning his full attention to Shadow. We need to talk. Unless it's something that pertains to the team or the league, then no, we don't. Naruto said with a cold tone. He knew what Batman wanted to talk about. Thanks to Cheshire, Batman knew they had some sort of relationship with her on a personal level since she knew his secrets, and thus, he had a connection to the League of Shadows. Or so he did in Batman logic. After all, how could he have contact with a member of the League of Shadows without actually being in contact with their higher-ups? Your relationship with Cheshire could put the team at risk, Batman said with narrowed eyes. He was tired of not being able to get a straight answer out of the masked hero, and damn frustrated that all of his detective work was bringing up nothing useful about him. My relationship, as you so put it, with her has nothing to do with the team, nor the Justice League, nor will it put anything other than myself at risk. Do you see me nosing about in your business? Keep this up and I wouldn't be surprised if Wayne Industries stock goes down in the market. Is that a threat? Batman hissed, glaring at the masked leaguer. You're the detective. Figure it out. All right, enough, Canary demanded, putting herself between Shadow and Batman who had gravitated toward each other. Bats, Shadow says it doesn't put them at risk, so leave it. With a narrowed gaze directed at Shadow, he said, this isn't over. It never is with you Bats. Naruto said resigned. Maybe he should just come clean with the damned bat just to get him off his case. Do that and he probably won't even believe you, Kurama's voice rang in his head. Che, you're probably right. He won't believe anything unless he finds out himself without my permission. Regardless, Red Tornado finally spoke, reminding those around him that he came with Batman. "We have another matter to discuss." "Right, that Twister guy," Naruto said, crossing his arms and taking a more relaxed stance. Just the day before, self-proclaimed Mr. Twister attacked a small city just a few miles away from the cave where Shadow and Canary were out trailing a lead. It was an annoying battle, having to counter all of his bloody miniature tornadoes, even with his clones and Canary to help. "Indeed. Had it not been for you and Black Canary, I would have been sabotaged or destroyed." "That's what we do for each other, Red," Canary said. "What I want to know is why he was after you in the first place." The android inside the suit was Brom Stick, a man with heavy background in robotic engineering and most probably the creator of Mr. Twister. Batman said, bringing up a few holographic screens with all the information they had on said man. "He was after reprogramming you, Red. That's what he said when you used a clone to look like Red, right, Shadow?" Canary asked. "He did," nodded said Leaguer. "That was all he said though. It is unlikely he was out to reprogram you to turn you into an unknowing spy, as he attempted to do so with another member of the League present." Batman said to his teammate, "It is more probable that he was out to turn you against the League entirely and take all of his information on the League and the team with him." Naruto finished the Dark Knight's theory. "Unfortunately, we will not know for certain until he makes another attempt, as we are unable to locate Brom Stick," Red Tornado supplied, his teammates nodding. Before they could continue to theorize together, Kid Flash made his entrance, tripping on his feet in his own excitement and landing face down in front of the League members. Biting back a laugh, Naruto asked, "You alright there, kid?" Grumbling, Kid Flash stood up immediately, brushing off the dust from his uniform. He simply nodded, a slight twinge of pink marring his cheeks. "Hey, should we be worried you can't run in a straight line without tripping, KF?" Robin asked mockingly, teasing his longtime friend with a smirk plastered on his face. "Shut it, Rob," Kid Flash grumbled at the team. "It wasn't his fault the floor was slippery." "We are here and ready to receive our assignment, Shadow," Calder said in a serious tone, though his eyes were clearly amused after watching his friends bicker. "Good," Batman said in place of Shadow before turning to the monitors and switching the information on Brom Stick with that of their covert mission. The team looked as the screens shifted to that of an island, and all of them saw where they would be sent out to. Santa Prisca. Chapter 6. Drop Zone, Caribbean Sea, July 22, 2008 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Approaching Drop Point A, Megan said in a serious tone to her team members, who all sat in the bioship mentally preparing themselves for what they were going to meet. This was their first real covert mission, and everyone was doing their best to show the entire Justice League that while they were young, they had what it took to be an actual hero, what it took to be a member of the League. Calder readied himself for the drop. It was his duty to disable the sensors on the beach so that the bioship could pass through completely unnoticed. Shifting to his camouflage mode, Megan telepathically opened a hole which Calder immediately dropped down in. It wasn't that far of a swim to the shore, and getting through the net barrier was a simple task thanks to his water bearers. As soon as he reached the shore, Calder made his way to the device hidden slightly by the natural growth and placed another device onto it. One where the readings from the past hour would continue to loop continuously. "All clear to move," Aqualad said to his teammates through their telepathic link. Rather than risking the use of easily hackable radio contact with each other, the team had decided that unless stated otherwise, Megan would maintain telepathic contact with every member and link them up on a singular thought mainframe. Understood. Moving to Drop Point B, Megan relayed to her teammate as Calder began to trek through the jungle-esque landscape. Megan and the others moved swiftly to Drop Point B, and as soon as they were on top of it, Megan opened several exit portals at the floor of the ship, as well as an underscore for them to latch onto. "Check out the new stealth tech," Kid Flash exclaimed, shifting his uniform from the original vibrant red and gold to dark shades of gray. "You sure you don't want to try out the new uniform, Superboy?" Robin asked with a smirk. He didn't need the stealth tech, he was a ninja all on his own without it. "No capes. No tights. No offense," Superboy replied, thoroughly against wearing anything other than his jeans and black shirt. He never thought it was appealing to see men in tights, but that was his personal opinion. "It totally works for you," Megan muttered to herself, only to realize Superboy could hear what she said. "I am that you can totally work in those clothes," she added afterward, extremely embarrassed and flustered. When Superboy merely raised an eyebrow her direction, Megan pulled her hood over her head and shifted herself into camouflage mode, all but disappearing from everyone's sight. As the rest of the team latched onto the underscore and dropped, Superboy merely jumped down, knowing the drop wouldn't hurt him. Down below, Robin, Kid Flash, and Megan had to jump out of the way before getting crushed by Superboy. As soon as he had touched down, his landing had created a small crater as well as a slight seismic wave. "Knew I didn't need the underscore," Superboy said smugly as he stood up from his kneel, brushing off the dust that had stuck to his shirt because of the landing. "But causing a seismic event is not helping on the covert," Robin exclaimed in a hushed voice. Ah. Right. Superboy said a bit sheepishly, internally berating himself. Shadow had always drilled into him that while he was tougher than most people, he couldn't use that as an excuse to go through with foolish actions. We need to move. Kid Flash said. Team, shift to night vision. Calder ordered as he climbed the side of a mountain, cutting his travel time to reach the team by a considerable amount. Understood. Shifting to night vision. Megan relayed. While both Robin and Kid Flash pressed a small button on their mask, goggles, Superboy merely blinked and noticed there was a group of armed men not too far from where they were. Got a party of armed bozos, Kid Flash thought to the rest of his team. 2 parties. Superboy corrected. But they'll meet each other before they find any of us. Not a moment after did the entire group hear the beginnings of a shootout. Looks like they already found each other, Kid Flash said looking at his teammates. We should observe from afar, see who the 2 groups are and why they don't seem to like each other, Robin suggested. Agreed. Calder's voice came in. Observe and report back to me. I'm nearing the rendezvous point. Gotcha, Aqualad. Wally replied, sharing a glance at his teammates before they all moved together to observe the group from a safe distance. Everything would have gone fine, and the group would have remained unnoticed by the inhabitants of the island had Wally not slipped on the wet growth of the forest and skidded straight to the no man's land between the 2 parties. As the 2 groups stared in frozen surprise and shock of the teen suddenly in the middle of their fight, Wally muttered to himself. So much for the stealth. Why? The Watchtower, how do you believe our young heroes will do? Red Tornado asked Fire Shadow, as they completed their Zeta Tube jump to the Watchtower. Canary had opted to stay at the cave, in case anything were to happen on their first mission out and required assistance via radio link. Naruto had originally planned to accompany them and watch their progress in the shadows, but he had chosen against it and decided to follow up on a few things that required his attention. I have faith in the team, Shadow said with confidence lacing his tone. I have no doubt they will perform satisfactorily, and perhaps even surprise us. As they moved into the confines of the Watchtower, Naruto bid his companions a short farewell and made his way to the League archives. While it wasn't his direct mission, Naruto wanted to figure out why 4 ice villains chose to attack simultaneously on July 4th. It was far too much to be a coincidence, and if anything, was an elaborate distraction for something deeper. Though for what, he hadn't a clue. All he knew was that Bats and the other Leaguers weren't anywhere closer to finding an answer and, for some reason, chose to leave himself and many others out of the metaphorical loop. He supposed it was mainly on account that Batman didn't fully trust Naruto, which was to be expected given their past and current relationship. He had begun with the intention to annoy the Bats, proclaimed to be the best detective, with trying to find anything deeper about him other from the plainly obvious. After a while, and far too many privacy violations, Naruto had chosen to vehemently hide everything he could from the nosy man. He was far too paranoid and if anything, deserved to be taken down a peg or 3. As Naruto made his way into the archives, he began to look up the 4 villains that had attacked as well as every single crime reported that day. The list of crimes reported were seemingly endless, and he was forced to narrow his search to crimes near important buildings and locations, as well as any that seemed out of the ordinary. In the end, he was still left with a disgustingly amount of reports and with a mental sigh, printed out a summary of every single report. He could have chosen to send it electronically, but to be honest, that left much more to be easily tracked, and he had preferred to read reports on written paper rather than on a screen. It was easier on his eyes and much more comfortable as he had been forced to read and write every report on a scroll during his time in the elemental nations. Hey, Shadow! A bright happy voice greeted him. What are you up to in the dreary archives? The man that had greeted him was none other than the Flash himself, donned completely in his costume of red and gold spandex. When he had originally met the man, Naruto couldn't help but laugh madly on the inside, thinking that 2 very enthusiastic people would have an absolute field day with him. After all, Lee and Guy both valued speed among all else, and for the man to be the fastest man on the planet, and wear spandex. Well, it would be a horrific combination. Though he was certain their personalities wouldn't exactly mesh as easily. Not men at least personality waves after all. Hello, Flash. Naruto greeted politely. Sue, are you going to answer my question? While I'm looking further into the coordinated attack of our 4 resident ice villains on the 4th of July. Naruto answered, waiting for the papers to be sent to his flash drive so that he could print it out on his personal printer as the Watchtower didn't have a simple printer. Apparently they were far too advanced for such plebeian devices. Oh, right. Bat still is digging on that. Get any leads? Flash asked interested. Haven't had much time to look into it, honestly. Though I'm sure I will find something eventually, same as I'm sure Batman will discover something on his own. True enough. The man can figure out practically anything, except of course anything dealing with you, he added with a smirk. If he wasn't so overbearing, then perhaps he would know more than common facts about me. Like, say my actual name. Naruto admitted with a slight groan. Haha, yeah, bats can be a bit pushy, Flash agreed, though, you don't tell anyone anything about you. Not true. Naruto said dryly. There are several individuals whom I have hidden nothing from, though, they are bound by their code of honor not to reveal anything that I have spoken of. I cannot be certain that members of the League will not reveal anything I tell them. I have told you many times before, Flash. I trust you with my life, but not my past. Yeah, we've all heard it, Shadow. Flash said a bit dejectedly. I just wish you would just trust us with that information. Not all of us have ulterior motives. I understand that, Flash. I will reveal who I am in time, but not in the near future. Perhaps if you finally manage to rid me of my mask I'll let you know my name. He added with a teasing smirk that was evident in his voice. A wide grin threatening to split his face erupted from the red-clad man, and in a swift movement, reached out in hopes of removing Shadow's mask once and for all. Though, like every attempt before, he failed. Ah, better luck next time, Flash. Naruto said, thoroughly amused. I'll get rid of that mask, just you wait and see, Flash exclaimed, reminding Naruto way too much of how he was before. I'm sure you will one day. But not today. One day soon, Shadow. Flash said with a grin before he reached to his earpiece and said a few things to whoever was speaking to him. Sorry, Shadow, gotta run. Be back in a flash. And in a swift movement, Flash had disappeared from his sight and all that remained in the archive was Naruto and the computers humming lowly. Shadow. A voice interrupted him through a very secure line. Bringing his hand up to the side of his mask, Naruto replied to the familiar voice. What is it? Naruto demanded quietly, we need to talk. Santa Prisca. Dang it Wally. Robin exclaimed through their telepathic link as the team saved Calder fought off both Bane and his men, as well as the cult of the Cobra. After Kid Flash had fallen in the center of the two parties' fight, the shooting started almost immediately afterward, and the team had to knock out both groups. The fight itself was a lot easier for the group to handle than it would have been without Shadow as their main trainer. After all, being pinned against 100 of his clones all at once was nothing compared to the 15-some people that were here. Thought the group could have gone without the guns. Those were always annoying, not to mention fatally dangerous to deal with. Once the number of conscious enemies dwindled to 0, the team rounded them up and proceeded to tie them all up to a small number of nearby trees. During the end of the fight, Calder had made his way to the rest of his teammates, helping knock out a few remaining enemies. I recognize these uniforms, they belong to the cult of the Cobra, Robin announced to his friends. I am sure Fire Shadow would have informed us had he known a dangerous extremist was running Santa Prisca's venom operation. Agreed. And since there's clearly no love lost between the cultist and those goons, I'm betting Cobra came in and tossed them out. That's why normal supply lines have been cut off. Robin added with a smirk, slightly smug about his deduction. We get it. Wally clipped in dryly, Cobra wanted super cultist. Mystery solved. Radio the cave and let's go home. He was more than ready to get out of this dreary island. The cultists aren't on venom. Robin exclaimed. Cobra's hoarding this stuff. We can't leave, not until we know why. Shadow would expect us to find out more. He always says to look underneath the underneath. Megan added, all her friends knowing that statement to be true. No kidding. Superboy snorted. We need to find a way to the factory without getting caught. The main entryways are bound to be securely guarded. Before he waited to listen to his teammates' responses, Superboy overheard light whispering coming from the group of goons they had tied. Vistazo a discutir. Scientes libre y llevar a cabo mientras están distraídos. One of the nameless goons said to the one who was obviously the leader. Kalate, por ahora me toca, que me dara lo que necesito. We should spread out. Calder said, breaking Superboy's focus on the goons. Try to find a way into the factory without any of the cultists, or Cobra, knowing. There we should find the answers we seek. Ha ha ha. The leafer of the goons laughed, such clever ninos. But you only have half the story. Let me show you the rest, get you into the factory via my secret entrance. There is a secret entrance, Megan said, already probing his mind. But he's also hiding something. As she tried to delve deeper into the man, Bane, apparently, she was blocked off. Chica. Bane is not that easy, the man said with a suppressed smirk on his face. Gah. The Martian winced, he's mentally reciting football scores en Espanol. This could take a while. It's not complicated, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The team all looked skeptical at the man, knowing he was hiding something, but they didn't have much of a choice other than to agree, having no sound way into the factory. Bane led them to the edges of the forest, where the factory was in clear view. Dozens of Cobra cultists swarmed around the grounds, all working diligently for their leader. Men were placing scores of boxes near a helicopter landing area. Look at all that product, Robin exclaimed, looking down at the factory through binoculars, enhanced to zoom in from far distances. There's a buy going down, but if Cobra's not selling to the usual suspects. We need to identify that buyer. Calder finished Robin's train of thought. Just what I was thinking. Wally added with a serious tone. Unable to resist the opportunity, Robin said teasingly to his friend, "Yeah, you're the thinker." "Dude, sarcasm? Dude, now is not the time, we need to focus on getting answers," he retorted, though the telltale twinge of pink that dusted his cheeks clearly showed he was slightly embarrassed. The team turned to the sound of grunting, and saw that Bane had pushed aside a large boulder from an entrance to a cave on the side of the mountain. "Answers," the man began, "are this way." The group of teens followed the man down the tunnelway, lit dimply by a few lanterns that hung on the rock ceiling, up till a point where they reached a metal mechanical door. Bane pressed his thumb against what looked to be a fingerprint scan, and soon after, the door spread wide open, clearing the way to the interior of the factory. The group had exited out a door on the far end of the factory, no cultists in sight. "All clear," Robin announced, exiting the small room and pressing himself against one of the many metal tubes that surrounded them. Feeling the urge to run off and find answers for himself, Robin stopped before he could move, remembering Shadow berate him with a volley of high-speed rubber balls to his person. The shadow pain caused him to shiver slightly, and he waited for HT. "Nice to see you didn't go all ninja on us," Wally said with a slight smirk, causing the boy wonder to visibly shudder. "Yeah, I try," he admitted, and his friends all in a way sympathized with the 13-year-old. Shadow really drilled in the lessons. "We need to get intel on the shipment," Calder said to his teammates. "I can go hack into their mainframe. It'll be a piece of cake," Robin said, already preparing to make his way to the room with access to the intel they needed. "Kid, go with Robin, both of you can sneak by any guards you come across easily." "Roger that," Wally said, noticing that Robin had already disappeared. "Aw man," he exclaimed unhappily before he pushed his goggles over his eyes and raced after the teen. It was easy enough for Robin to hack into the mainframe, especially after knocking out the cultist who was using the computer with his personalized bird A-Rang equipped with knockout gas. Pushing the unconscious guard off the seat, Robin began to type away mercilessly at the keyboard, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "What you got?" Wally asked once he reached the room Robin was sitting in, chewing on a high-calorie snack bar. "Chemical formulas," the 13-year-old replied, still typing away at the keyboard. "I'm guessing it involves venom, but..." "This one's venom," Wally supplied, pointing at the molecular structure of the venom that was displayed on the screen, "and that one's..." "Whoa. The blockbuster formula from Cadmus. Mixed correctly, Cobra's new juice is 3 times stronger than venom. And permanent," he finished grimly. "But how did Cobra get access to Project Blockbuster? Our mystery buyer must also be Cobra's supplier, using the cult to create the Blockbuster Venom super formula." After this deduction, Robin immediately focused on the team's telepathic link, Aqualad. Cobra's mystery buyer is also his supplier. He made a super formula by combining the Blockbuster formula and venom. The new juice is at least 3 times stronger than venom and permanent. Through the mental link, Robin and Wally could feel the shock from their other teammates. "I see. Then that is why they have not touched the current venom stored in the factory." Calder stated, "There is a massive shipment, and Superboy says there is a helicopter coming. I suspect it is the buyer. Megan is camouflaged by the helicopter landing area." "Team," Megan said through their link, "I am sending you a telepathic image of the buyer." Not a second after, the rest of the team felt the image of none other than Sportsmaster's face in their minds. "Sportsmaster," Calder exclaimed, "he is the mystery buyer?" Without a moment's hesitation, Calder reached his earpiece and said, "Aqualad to the cave, do you read?" After waiting a moment and hearing only static, he groaned. Can't reach the league. We need a plan. Now," he said out loud, frustrated they were relatively on their own with a bit more than he thought they could handle. "I have a suggestion," Bane said with a telltale smirk on his face. Without any other word, Bane jumped down the walkway with a man-like roar, taking down a few cultists before shots began to be fired, undoubtedly informing those outside of what was happening. "What is he?" Before Calder's sentence could be finished, a beast of a man came crashing through the window to Superboy's and Calder's left, causing both heroes to jump down to dodge out of the way. "Robin, Kid Flash, Megan, we need you now, your known location." Naruto groaned internally as he reached the rendezvous point, a large, desolate, and deteriorating warehouse in the middle of nowhere. He had specifically told Cheshire they needed an actual headquarters, but no, the girl much rather meet in gross, dusty, rat-infested locations such as the one they were in. My, a sultry voice piped in, echoing in the confines of the large empty building, "Someone's in a bad mood." Naruto turned up to where she was perched, and watched with a dull expression behind his mask as she jumped down from the steel beam. "You know how I feel about meeting in places like this," he said with disdain littering his tone. "Yes, you have no sense of vision," she commented, sounding rather disappointed in that fact. "Vision? Sorry if I don't like to talk in a dark, dusty, vermin-infested shit of a building." "Enough." Another voice piped in, causing both trained assassins to turn to where it originated from, Out of the shadows came a man dressed similarly to Naruto, though rather than a fox mask. The man's mask was an elegantly painted desert eagle, not to mention he was a few inches taller than the blonde. "Hey, Feathers," Naruto quipped with a smirk shining through his amused tone. "Remove your mask, Uzumaki, and refrain from calling me Feathers," the man said in an emotionless, dry, demanding tone that caused Jade to chuckle slightly. "Ma, you really need to stop being so serious, Feathers," Naruto said teasingly, removing the fox mask from his face, revealing his cerulean blue eyes and whiskered cheeks. His face was no longer that of a youth or child, but a young man well into his way to adulthood. His hair had grown slightly, and resembled that of the Yondaime Hokage more than his unmanageable spiky mess he once had. Over time, the bright sunshine-dipped color of his hair had dulled slightly, turning into a more natural-looking blonde, though still very vibrant against his tan skin. "Yours as well, Cheshire," the man demanded again. "Very well," she breathed out, reaching with her right hand to take off the wickedly grinning mask, revealing her half-Vietnamese, half-Caucasian features. "Well, if we're removing our masks, go ahead and remove yours, Feathers," Naruto continued, grinning widely at the remaining masked man. Without much hesitation, the man took off his mask, revealing his true features. "So nice to see you again, Feathers." "Quiet, Uzumaki. We have much to discuss." "Santa Prisca. Destroy them," Cobra demanded once he caught sight of the little heroes that dared to interfere. Without another word, Mammoth, the man-beast, charged with a beastly roar, meeting heads-on with an equally enraged Superboy. Not long after, the cultists began to fire at Calder, who changed one of his water-bearers into a shield and the other into a water-type gun that shot condensed water at the trigger-happy men. Megan flew in, still camouflaged, and began to telekinetically throw small numbers of the cultists from harming her friends. Unfortunately, being camouflaged was still a ways away from actually being invisible, and with keen eyes, Sportsmaster was able to see her clearly. The hockey-type-like masked man threw a spear her way, and Megan scarcely dodged it from impaling her, only for her to be blown back by a well-timed explosive. Once Robin and Calder joined the fight, things easily became a bit more organized. "We need to regroup," Calder exclaimed. "I have to go stop the helicopter. We can't let them leave," Robin said, already making his way to the helicopter landing area. While the rest of the team was fending off from the massive horde of Cobra cultists and one mutated enhanced man that could easily go toe-to-toe with Superman's strength, Robin fought against Cobra's right-hand woman for the operation, Shimmer. "Robin, now," Calder demanded, knowing that even with their strength as a team, they would be easily overrun soon enough. Scowling, Robin barely had the chance to disrupt the helicopter's functions before he threw a smoke pellet and disappeared from Shimmer and Cobra's sight. Once the team was all back in one place, Calder said, "We need to retreat. Kid, clear a path." Knowing what to do, Wally raced through the cultists that blocked their path, knocking every single one of them down with his inhuman speed. Not waiting another moment, the entire team began to race back to the secret entrance, trying to evade the scores of bullets and one beastman for a good while. Even though they had closed the foot-thick steel door between them and the factory, Mammoth easily pounded through it and the coup upon them again. "Superboy," Calder said, "the support beams." Not even motioning a nod, Superboy punched through two beams and Megan had to telekinetically fly him out before the ceiling came down upon them. Once they were in the clear, Calder broke a couple of glow sticks, lighting the once pitch-black tunnel as the lanterns were cut off from the electricity line. "Okay," Wally breathed out, leaning against the wall of the tunnel, all in favor of officially making Calder out leader? While Calder looked shocked at the proposition, the rest of the team, without missing a beat, said, "Aye." Smirking at Aqualad's shocked expression that was dimly lit thanks to the red glow sticks, he said, "Come on, Calder. You know you're the one to lead this team. You're the only one who can." Cuddle told Ya. Superboy added, his arms crossed. "I will accept this burden, but only until you are ready to lead this team, Robin," Calder said, looking directly in the masked eyes of their youngest teammate. "You were born to lead this team. Perhaps not now, but one day soon." Robin smiled genuinely. While he knew that he wasn't ready to lead the team, he still wanted to. Hearing Calder's opinion definitely helped him accept it all. "Our first priority," Calder announced, "is to stop that shipment from leaving the island." "Already took care of that," Robin reminded them. "It won't hold them forever, but it'll give us time to destroy the shipment. I've copied and deleted the original data on the new Cobra Venom. Then let us move." As they sped down the tunnel, Robin began to read vehemently through the intel he had gathered on his forearm computer. Sportsmaster's the supplier, buyer, but it still doesn't track. He doesn't have the juice to obtain the blockbuster formula, or to get Cobra to do his dirty work. And neither of them have the chops to combine blockbuster with Venom. That took some major nerdage. "I believe the expression is, tip of the iceberg," Calder said, stopping short as they reached the exit of the tunnel, watching as Bane made his way in front of them. "Halt, niños," he said, holding a detonation device. The team looked around them and saw the entire entranceway was littered with explosives. I'm feeling explosive. You betrayed us. Why? Calder exclaimed with narrowed eyes. I want my factory back. Bane admitted easily. Kid, you need a running start. Calder relayed quickly through their telepathic link. Without a word, Kid Flash readied himself, waiting for the right moment to grab the detonation device from Bane. So I forced you into a situation where you would either take down my enemies, or die trying. If the latter, the Justice League would certainly have come to avenge their sidekicks. And when the smoke cleared, Santa Prisca would be mined once more. Blowing the tunnel with you inside would have the same effect. As Bane smirked, about to press the trigger, Kid Flash raced forward and caught hold of the detonator without him even knowing until he pressed down his thumb to feel nothing there. With what? Kid Flash asked with a smirk, leaning against a tree, the detonator wiggling in his hand. This trigger thingy. With an angered roar, Bane leapt toward the red-haired teen, only to be thrown back telekinetically by Megan. Turning Bane around, Megan smiled slightly as Superboy readied his fist. Finally, the clone said, his fist readied for a right hook. Drop him. Without an hesitation, Megan dropped her hand and simultaneously dropped Bane, his world turning black as soon as Superboy's fist met with his face. The factory, the helicopter is operational, Exalted One, a cultist said to Cobra with a bow. As Sportsmaster was making his way to the helicopter, a row of cultists standing to the sides of him, ready to make way with the new Cobra venom, Wally flashed through and knocked out a couple of cultists, beginning the last confrontation on the island. Shots were fired, and Cobra commanded Sportsmaster to take the shipment and leave immediately. Without uttering a word, Sportmaster raced his way to the helicopter, ready to leave the island and back to his bosses. Choosing to make a dynamic entry, Superboy leapt through the air and landed a few meters away from Cobra and Mammoth, the latter roaring before racing toward him, roaring in trepidation before he was pummeled with a sudden burst of water thanks to none other than Calder. Soon, the battle turned to the teen hero's favor, the number of unconscious cultists rising, and Robin chose it a perfect moment to taunt the leader, Cobra. I know you hate getting your hands dirty, he said, smirking. True, Cobra admitted, taking off his hooded coat, revealing his muscular body. But sometimes, even a god must swoop to conquer. Scowling a bit, Robin initiated the attack, but was easily taken over by Cobra's larger body and strength. The man literally caught hold of Robin's leg and kicked him feet away from his person, undoubtedly bruising the boy's abdomen, if not crack a few of his ribs. Off to the other side of the battlefield, Megan was being held at the throat by Sportsmaster as he shot explosive rounds at Superboy, who could do nothing more than protect himself against the bullets. Sorry, kiddies, Sportsmaster said, throwing Megan at Superboy. I got to fly. Megan and Superboy watched silently as Sportsmaster began to fly off in the helicopter, both of them turning to each other before sharing a small grin. Megan took out the small detonator device Bane had planned to use on them, and pressed down on the small green button, watching as the helicopter immediately went up in flames. Though not without noticing Sportsmaster had managed to blow the co-op before the helicopter was completely destroyed. The rest of the fight didn't last much longer, especially after the remnants of the helicopter dove straight down into the factory, effectively exploding the entire building into flames. Cobra had fled shortly after being confronted by the entire team, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. All they knew now was that the mission was over, and they had to explain everything to Shadow. Great, was the main thought on all the team's minds as they looked at the destruction they caused in their fight. Mount Justice Observation Deck 9:58 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Recognized. Fire Shadow, 17. Ah, there you are, Shadow. Black Canary's voice rang melodically to Naruto's ears as he exited the Zeta tube. I was wondering where you had gone off to. The team is on their way back from a successful mission, it seems. With a small smirk, Naruto said, I never had any doubt they wouldn't be successful. They've trained far too harshly and come much too close to have failed a simply covert mission such as the one given to them. Unless something occurred during the mission that forced them to adapt. Smiling wryly, Canary said, always were the observant one. I don't know the full details, but that will be given soon enough. Nodding, Naruto made his way to the center of the observation deck, directly in front of the open screens. The team has returned, came Red Tornado's mechanical voice rang in the room. Good, no, recognized. Batman 02. Fantastic. Naruto grumbled lowly, eliciting a soft stifled chuckle from Canary. How nice of you to be here, Batman. Naruto said in a polite tone. I received word the team was successful. I am here for their report. Batman replied briskly. You could have simply read it when it was inputted into the computers with all the other reports, Batman. In case you've forgotten already, I am in charge of this team. Not Canary, not Red, and certainly not you. Scowling at the masked youth in front of him, Batman didn't have a chance to usher a retort as the entire team walked into the room. The Leaguers looked onto the group of teen heroes and at once, Calder began to recite the happenings of the mission, Robin helping fill in the smaller details that were necessary in a detailed report, along with a few side comments from the others. All in all, Naruto was more than impressed with they performed above what was expected of them. After all, once they discovered who was behind the ongoings of the Santa Prisca factories, their mission parameters were met to a full. They didn't need to continue on with their investigation and stop Sportsmaster from gaining the newly enhanced Cobra Venom that was mixed with the blockbuster serum from Cadmus Labs. A very good thing to stop. When they finished, Naruto crossed his arms and sent out pleased waves to the team. You did well, all things considering. At times, mission parameters are thrown out the metaphorical window and we must adjust. Batman, not particularly enjoying standing on the sidelines saying nothing, chose to put his 2 cents in. There is still much to improve on, he said, causing the team to visibly deflate. It comes with experience, and given time, you all will cease to make foolish rookie mistakes. Batman has a point, Shadow said, shocking many of the team in Canary. So, take tomorrow's training off so that you all can review everything you did well and could have improved on during the mission. Kid Flash and Robin could scarcely contain their snickers at his order. They all knew it was just a jab at Batman, but they didn't mind it too much. Some days, watching the two banter back and forth is the best entertainment one could find. Of course, things had yet to get physical. Not even training spars. Either way, there were always small bets placed on who would win the argument, and much deliberation on who would win a physical battle between the two. End point. Well done, review what you can do better and what you did well on tomorrow, and go get some well-deserved sleep. Naruto continued, motioning for the team to disperse. As the team left, Naruto could feel the deep intense stare that Batman was giving him. The damned Bat just doesn't know when to give up, does he? Unfortunately. I just hope we don't get caught. That would be bad, kid. Kurama admitted. Be more cautious, kid. I feel like this is only the beginning of something bigger than all of us. I hate it when I think you're right. Damned it all, he knew deep inside that it really was only the beginning.